Morning. There are days when I wish I worked on a music station. I don't wish it for very long. Obviously, when you've got verbal diarrhea to the degree that I have, then it would be, I suspect, a very brief period of satisfaction. Today is not one of those days. But if I did work on a music station, I know exactly what song I'd be playing at this point in proceedings. I can't tell you its title, but I can tell you that it's by the rather wonderful Lily Allen. I shall leave you to work out whether or not you can identify what that song is. Oddly, this resignation of Dominic Raab's just a few minutes. I bet you thought I knew, didn't you, when you heard that little trail when I said, I know he's a bullying coward. And you thought, can you say that, James, if he hasn't actually resigned? I bet you thought I knew. Well, you'll never know whether I did or not. But I don't know what question I'm going to ask you at the end of my contemplations and pontifications, but it seems quite likely that I'm just going to ask you, what do you make of this? What does it say to you? How much longer can this lot get away with this catalogue, this absolute avalanche of appalling behaviour? This is actually a good day for British democracy, because despite his best efforts to wriggle off the hook, he hasn't. When Priti Patel was found to have breached the ministerial code with regard to bullying, remember, Boris Johnson left her in post and accepted the resignation of the independent advisor who had found her guilty of bullying. It's very easy to gloss over those moments on our national decline, because obviously so much of the media was encouraging you to look the other way or pretending that it was in any way acceptable conduct. Such was the cult of Boris Johnson, and do make sure you've got your teeth in before deploying that phrase in the wild today. These were moments of national catastrophe, whatever your politics are. I appreciate, and I don't think I'm going to bend over backwards to be polite today. If you are too stupid or too biased to realise that even if it's your lot doing it, the damage to democracy affects us all, then you're probably still listening to the wrong programme. But when Dominic Cummings lied brazenly and blatantly about driving to Barnard Castle on his wife's birthday to visit a local beauty spot, or in direct breach of coronavirus regulations, and then claimed that it was to test his eyesight before going on an even longer drive, they were all laughing at you, especially if you have got lots of flags in your Twitter profile and Forever Boris as your hashtag. That you are the people they laugh at loudest. You are the people who they wait for you to leave the room and then collapse in fits of giggles like Queen Elizabeth, Melchett and Nursey in an episode of Blackadder 2. You are the people they hate the most, and you are the people they laugh at, still waving your pathetic little Brexit flags and claiming that Boris Johnson got it done. They despise you. And the extent of that hatred is on display when people like Priti Patel keep their jobs despite being bullies, when people like Suella Braverman get their jobs back despite breaking the ministerial code. And that's why it's taken so long for Raab to go. Make no mistake, this would have been an exercise in wriggling, a desperate exercise with or without Sunak's connivance, although given what he did with Suella Braverman, it seems to me perfectly plausible he'd have been part of an Operation Save Raab. That's what they've done. That's why it's taken so long. You remember Operation Save Owen Paterson after he was found to have breached the parliamentary code. They assembled whatever the opposite of the Avengers would be in a desperate attempt to save his career. Jacob Rees-Mogg inevitably in the driving seat. Boris Johnson inevitably pulling the strings. People like Charles Moore at the Daily Telegraph inevitably writing articles about how unfairly Owen Paterson had been treated. Because I'll tell you one inalienable truth about the last few years of British politics. Everybody who accuses the other lot of being sore losers or of being snowflakes or of being thin-skinned or of being hypersensitive are the biggest whining, mewling, puking infants you could ever encounter in a million years in public life. Oh, it wasn't me. Oh, it's not fair. Oh, I didn't mean it. Oh, can he have his job back? Oh, I was testing my eyesight. Oh, let's form a circle around the Pritster. Oh, Nadine Dorries. Oh, they are absolutely tragic. And whatever your politics, if you've got 3 brain cells, there will come a day sooner rather than later when you realise what's been done to you by the people you thought were on your side. So today is a good day because the wriggle has failed. an administration that's already demonstrated a degree of contempt for the ministerial code has found itself in a position where it cannot ignore the ministerial code. A man who pledged to resign if he was found to have been a bully has resigned because he's been found to have been a bully. But here we still are. At the end of this, I suspect I will, and he'll probably be back. You know, it's not like you and me getting a kicking or getting our sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap. He did. Another thing I find odd at times like this is how they segue effortlessly to the back benches. How would you feel about that? Your boss has been demoted for bullying you, and now he sits next to you in the office. Now he works next to you in the factory. Doesn't quite ring true, does it? Sling him out. Stick him on the slag heap. Hand him his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap. I will probably at the end of this contemplation ask you what you make of it all, but I'm going to begin by going through the letter with a degree, I hope, of depth. Dear Prime Minister, that's fairly uncontroversial. I am writing to resign from your government following receipt of the report arising from the inquiry conducted by Adam Tolley, KC. Full stop. Off letter now. I am writing to resign from your government some 24 hours after receiving the report from Adam Tolley, KC, during which time I have wriggled violently in a desperate attempt to get off the hook of the consequences of my own conduct in exactly the same way that so many of my colleagues have done since Brexit. From Priti Patel to Dominic Cummings to Suella Braverman to Owen Paterson, I have engaged in a long and fruitful post-Brexit conservative tradition of desperately trying to evade any responsibility whatsoever for my proven actions, for the consequences of my proven actions. We continue. I called for the inquiry and undertook to resign if it made any finding of bullying whatsoever. Off the letter again. This at the time was the only way in which I could conceivably cling on to my job after civil servants queued up in numbers to accuse me of all manner of abuses, including some which had reportedly left colleagues suicidal. I, however, Dominic Raab, am the real victim here. I didn't expect to resign because I served in a government that allowed Priti Patel to keep her job after she'd been found guilty of bullying. I served in a government that allowed Dominic Cummings to keep his job after he was found guilty of breaking lockdown laws that he'd helped to implement on a blatant and brazen scale. I served in the government that became the address at which more criminal breaches of lockdown laws were committed than any other address in the country. And I saw Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak receive fines for that behaviour and behave as if nothing untoward had happened at all. I didn't think I'd have to resign because I am Deputy Prime Minister in a government that gets its testicles tickled by right-wing newspapers every morning instead of being held to account for the most obvious and egregious breaches of the most basic and simple traditions and supporters of British democracy. I didn't expect to resign. I expected front pages on the Daily Mail describing how it was a damp squib, or how it was a witch hunt, or how they were unfairly going after Big Bad Dom. I didn't expect to resign when I pledged to resign, but hey-ho, here I am. Next sentence. I believe it is important to keep my word. I believe it is important to keep my word. Wait, was he Deputy Prime Minister to Boris Johnson? He was, wasn't he? I, a man who served as Deputy Prime Minister to Boris Johnson, believe it is important to keep my word. Whew. Good God, we've fallen so far. Paragraph 2. It has been a privilege to serve you as Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor. Positions which I shamefully clung on to while this inquiry was being conducted. Anybody in the Labour Party at the moment, led by that man that you childishly describe as Sir Softy, gets suspended at the first suggestion of the kind of conduct I've now been found guilty of, but you saw fit to leave me in post for months while this investigation was being conducted and while the victims of my appalling abuses and bullying were left wondering whether they were going to receive any justice whatsoever. But I am also the Justice Secretary responsible for the biggest backlog in history in our courts, while claiming publicly that I'm somehow making progress in that field. I believe it is important to keep my word, says a man who lied about the judicial system, court backlogs, and, of course, lawyers in general. Back to the letter. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to work as a minister in a range of roles and departments since 2015 and pay tribute to the many outstanding civil servants with whom I have worked. I appreciate that without Brexit breaking pretty much every requirement of competence or decency on the part of Conservative politicians, I would never have got off the bench. But thanks to Brexit, I managed to be promoted far beyond my capabilities and somehow ended up not just in the cabinet, but also Foreign Secretary when I accidentally stayed on the beach while Kabul fell and then lied about the sea being closed, and Deputy Prime Minister. Whilst I feel duty-bound to accept the outcome of the inquiry, it dismissed all but two of the claims levelled against me. Please don't look at the accusations and allegations that have been found to be true. Concentrate instead on the ones that have not been found to be true, whether due to lack of evidence or some other technicality. I would rather not focus on the fact that I'm guilty, but focus instead on the things that I haven't been found guilty of. This despite the fact that I'm a trained lawyer. Never in my legal career have I stood up in court and responded to a verdict by pointing out the charges that have not been found guilty and urging the judge to concentrate instead on the charges. Well, you can fill in the gaps there. I also believe that its two adverse findings are flawed and set a dangerous precedent for the conduct of good government. I have not got a Scooby-Doo what the conduct of good government looks like because I've been part of the two... Well, actually, I don't think he had a role in Truss's government, did he? But I've certainly been part of two of the three worst governments in the history of the United Kingdom. Indeed, I was Deputy Prime Minister in both of them. But I'm going to bleat meaninglessly today about the importance of the conduct of good government without mentioning that I was party to some of the most obvious and egregious breaches of both the Ministerial Code and the Parliamentary Code of Ethics without ever saying a single word in protest. It's 10:15. First, ministers must be able to exercise direct oversight with respect to senior officials over critical negotiations conducted on behalf of the British people. Otherwise, the democratic and constitutional principle of ministerial responsibility will be lost. Says a man who resigned as a minister shortly after revealing that he accepted the job as Brexit Secretary without actually appreciating the importance of the crossing between Dover and Calais to the import and export of goods into and out of the United Kingdom. That's a level of stupidity that is beyond parody. That is Nadine Dorries level stupidity. But the man is arguably too dim to realise the awfulness of his own admission. This was particularly true during my time as Foreign Secretary in the context of the Brexit negotiations over Gibraltar, when a senior diplomat breached the mandate agreed by Cabinet. Pour me a drink, says Dominic Raab. Not mentioning, of course, his greatest hits as Foreign Secretary, up to and including the time that he declined to come back from his holiday while Kabul fell, and Afghan translators and other professionals who had actually helped the British keep the Taliban at bay were effectively abandoned. I better stop now. I'm only down 3 paragraphs, but it's 10:16. Shall we come back and do the rest after this? Oh, go on then. 19 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you're just joining us, Dominic Raab has resigned. Rishi Sunak failed to find the requisite cojones or testicular resolve to get rid of him. So Raab has had to fall on his sword after spending the best part of 24 hours trying to wriggle off the hook that his own conduct as a bully, had so clearly put him on. And so it continues, this desperate attempt to resign while not really accepting any responsibility for the things that he's tried to resign over. Do you tell your children that there's no but in sorry? I used to. They're too old now. You say, you can't say sorry but. I'm sorry, but I didn't hit her, Dad. She ran into my fist. I'm sorry, but. He doesn't actually use the word but. He uses the word however instead. Have a listen to this sentence. Second, he says, ministers must be able to give direct critical feedback on briefings and submissions to senior officials in order to set the standards and drive the reform the public expects of us. The most amazing thing about people like Dominic Raab is the marriage of incompetence with self-regard. It is so healthy to have a little bit of insecurity. It really is. But how you deal with insecurity determines how you present to the world. So if you greet your insecurity, if you haven't got any insecurity, you're a sociopath. I'm not qualified to comment on whether Dominic Raab is a sociopath or not. There certainly are sociopaths in government. There are sociopaths at the top of most organisations, someone utterly devoid of conscience or empathy. Suella Braverman, I'd be more confident describing as a sociopath in the current context. So it may be that Raab is insecure and he masks his insecurity by behaving as if he has all the answers to everything and is actually some sort of superhero. You can know. It's very, very hard to tell, and I don't have the psychological training. But if you are incompetent and you are conscious of your incompetence and you are on some psychological level ashamed of your incompetence, then one of the things that you do is shout a lot and become a bully in order to mask your incompetence and claim that you are a hard taskmaster. We've all worked with people like that. We've all worked with people. It's a bit like a caller to this show, a sort of gammon and pineapple caller to the show, where they're very angry and very certain, and they can pull that off in most contexts. They can pull that off in most exchanges or most environments. But what they can't do is answer very simple questions like why. People who shout their way to the finish line. We're all familiar with people like that. People who won't allow you to pick up on what they say. People who might, for example, say, I'm not debating Brexit anymore, because they know that if they had to answer the most simple questions about the thing that they were so full-throated in their support of, they would be rendered at the very least ridiculous and at worst downright dishonest. So you can shout your way to the finish line if you're a bully. You can bully your way to the finish line, and then you can persuade yourself that you're actually a tough guy. I'm not a bully, I'm a tough guy. I get things done. If people can't handle the heat, they should get out of the kitchen. I'm Dominic Raab, master chef, and if you can't handle the heat, you should get out of my kitchen. That's how he sees himself. Almost certainly. He does judo, doesn't he, or karate, or something like that. I bet he does it in the mirror. I bet he does it in the mirror. Wax on, wax off. I'm Dominic Raab, Karate Kid. I bet he does it in the mirror. And then, of course, he comes to work where his inadequacies are clear for everybody to see, because most civil servants are quite clever. And in order to mask the fact that he's the thickest person in the room, he has to be the angriest. If you're the thickest person in the room, pretend to be the angriest. Seriously, you'll get away with it, especially if you're senior. If you're the thickest person in the room and the most senior person in the room, you're absolutely fine. You're absolutely over the line until you cross a line, at which point people can submit formal complaints and a proper investigation will be instigated. If you're in Priti Patel's Foreign Office, or Home Office, I beg your pardon, and that proper investigation is instigated, sadly, there is no guarantee that the bully will be punished at the end of the investigation that found that she's a bully, because Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. Whether or not Rishi Sunak is party to this desperate attempt by Dominic Raab to wriggle off the hook or not, only time will tell. So that's how he does it. And that's what he means when he says, I set standards and drive the reform the public expect of us. I'm Dominic Raab, Karate Kid, driving reform and setting... No, you're shouting at people or bullying people or being unpleasant to people or undermining people. If you've got a really powerful mandate, a really powerful platform, a really powerful plan, you can whisper it to people. If you're right, you can whisper it. So that's not true. That doesn't work. We're going to do this. But on he goes. Of course, this must be done within reasonable bounds. Clearly, this is not in the letter. I did not do it within reasonable bounds, but I'm not going to admit that because I'm a pathetic man-child. Mr. Tolley concluded that I had not once in 4.5 years sworn or shouted at anyone, let alone thrown anything or otherwise physically intimidated anyone, nor intentionally sought to belittle anyone. I am, like all bullies, unaware of the consequences of my actions or the reality of my engagements with other human beings. This is because I am both thick and angry almost all the time, too stupid to realise how offensive I'm being, and too angry to pause long enough to wonder whether or not I'm being offensive to people. I am genuinely sorry for any unintended stress or offence that any officials felt as a result of the pace, standards and challenge that I brought to the Ministry of Justice. I'm Dominic Raab, Karate Kid, feel my pace, standards and challenge. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the Raab kitchen. It's so easy to read these people. They're so unspeakably pathetic. It's almost shooting fish in a barrel territory, isn't it? But on we go. Remember, I'm sorry, but is not an apology. Here it is. Here it is almost word for word. I'm genuinely sorry for any unintended stress. That is, however, what the public expect of ministers working on their behalf. I'm sorry, but this is what the public expect me to do. Dominic Raab is looking you in the eye and saying, I'm sorry I'm a bully, but it's what you wanted. It's what you wanted. If he had any friends, they'd have read this letter for him and advised him to take out a few of these lines before sending it out. The same, of course, was true in the Deems of Harwey. To lose one senior minister in the first few weeks of your administration might be regarded as careless. But to lose two? In setting the threshold for bullying so low, as in so low that I couldn't get over it, in setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent. It will encourage spurious complaints against ministers and have a chilling effect on those driving change on behalf of your government and ultimately the British people. I, the outgoing Justice Secretary, am attacking the judge. Just like every scumbag criminal that's ever been handed a guilty verdict in the dock, he's attacking the judge. It's not my fault, it's the judge's fault. It's a stupid law anyway. I'm Dominic Raab, Karate Kid. I shouldn't have to abide by the rules of people who don't have a black belt. The British people wanted me to be a bully. Finally, I raised with you a number of improprieties that came to light during the course of this inquiry. This is the bit where he claims he's the real victim here. They include the systematic leaking of skewed and fabricated claims to the media in breach of the rules of the inquiry and the Civil Service Code of Conduct. So, in a country where the media is so horribly biased in favour of his party, his prime ministers, his Brexit, he somehow thinks that you see this a little bit among the gammon and pineapple corners of Twitter, among the Billy Buncher numbers with the Bulldog avatar, the claim that the MSM, the mainstream media, is biased against us, when they can't name a single outlet, except possibly The Guardian, that ever says boo to a fascist adjacent goose. It's quite incredible. Oh, the media were against me as well. I'm Dominic Raab. Everybody hates me. And finally, the coercive removal by a senior official of dedicated private secretaries from my Ministry of Justice private office in October of last year. Yada, 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 yada. Poor me, poor me, poor me, poor me. And then I remain as supportive of you and this government as when I first introduced you at your campaign leadership launch last July. In other words, Rishi, come on. I'm your boy. I'm Dom the Karate Kid. You can't throw me. I introduced you at your campaign leadership launch last July. Why do you think I did that? If not to ensure that I got some sort of protective ring thrown around me in the event of me being found to be a bully. When Priti Patel was being found to be a bully, Boris sent out a WhatsApp saying form a circle round the Pritster. Rishi. He's like Alan Partridge shouting Dan in the car park now in the final line of this letter. Rishi. You have proved a great Prime Minister in very challenging times. Go on, mate, evidence. List it. And you can count on my support from the backbenches, where I will almost certainly be bumping into civil servants that I've just been found guilty of bullying. But hey-ho, that's their tough luck. I'm Dom Raab, Karate Kid. And if you can't stand the heat, it's time you got out of my kitchen. It's coming up to 10:30. Not only did I manage to hit the break more or less on time at 15:15, but I'm bringing this in on time as well, although I should remind you that this is ostensibly a radio phone-in show and I haven't yet demonstrated any particular inclination to take any calls from anybody at any point in proceedings. I think that should probably change now. What do you want to say? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You've got a Deputy Prime Minister who's a bully. You had a Home Secretary who was a bully. You had a Chancellor of the Exchequer who had been economical with the actuality about his own tax affairs. And where does it end? What happened to Gavin Williamson? Didn't he have to go as well? Nadine Dorries is too busy presenting chat shows and writing newspaper columns to reflect upon the damage that she's done to our country. It's frankly unbelievable. And, Keith, get the tin. When it comes to Dominic Raab, my God, I told you so. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:34 is the timer, and of course he jumped. He wasn't pushed. Sunak did not have the testicular fortitude to hand him his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap to kick him into touch. I think he did sack Zahawi, didn't he? He did sack Zahawi. He sacked Nadeem Zahawi. So hard to keep up, isn't it, with the catalogue of corrupt conduct undertaken by Conservatives in the current climate. But so what you've got really is two senior members of Rishi Sunak's cabinet who've broken the ministerial code. Neither of whom he sacked. Suella Braverman he rehired after she was sacked by Liz Truss, 6 days after she was sacked by Liz Truss for breaking the ministerial code. And now he hasn't actually found the cojones to sack Dominic Raab for being a bully. He's sort of sat there waiting, going, oh, do you think you could resign yourself? Have you ever been in a meeting like that? Well, what we'd like you to do is to announce your resignation. Well, I'm not going to. I remember when I got expelled from school, I said, we're going to say you were asked to leave. I said, all right, well, if you're asking me to leave, I'm saying no. Well, it's not quite, we don't really, it's not, I mean, it's say, no, you're sacking me. I'm not going to pretend that I'm, well, would you mind resign? I'm not, but I haven't got the guts to sack you. So would you please just 24 hours after I got the report that proves you to be a bully, would you just go out and resign? And then hopefully no one will ask me why I didn't have the guts to sack you and I can carry on calling Keir Starmer Mr. Softy or Sir Softy. Should take some calls, shouldn't I? 0345 6060 is the number that you need. Mark's in Leeds. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Basically, just to say, from someone who's been bullied, that resignation form has made me angry.
Yes, it's exactly what a bully would write, I think.
Yeah, there's no way of saying, look, if I have made this mistake,
yes,
and I have bullied people, let's sit down and let's discuss it with people around us, so I can find out what I've done to move forward.
I'd particularly like to apologise to the people identified in the report as the victims of my bullying, for example.
Yeah, but he doesn't want to sit down and talk to them and discuss what he's done wrong, because at the end of the day, the people who have been bullied, they're going to have to deal with that for the rest of their lives. I mean, without plugging your book again, I have read your book, and you said one of the teachers bullied you in your book there enough, and it affected you for a very long time.
Well, he beat me physically.
Yeah, but and you writing that letter to him was a big thing for you.
Yeah, it stays with you forever. Stays with you forever, whether you're a kid or an adult. You're on the receiving end of bullying behaviour, you're on the receiving end of abusive behaviour. It stays with you forever.
Yeah, exactly. And it would make you feel. Once you wrote that letter, that made you feel better. Well, it'd make the people feel better if they could actually say how they made them feel and what they could do to try and resolve it. Yes, he still needs to resign, but he needs to move forward with it as well, instead of just being a bully and accepting it.
And of course, he's been free for months to claim that he was completely innocent and he'd been done nothing wrong, while the people that were accusing him of bullying are required by the Code of Conduct in the Civil Service to stay absolutely silent and indeed anonymous. It's incredible, really. And Rishi Sunak just sat on his hands hoping that it would all go away. I think Gavin Williamson resigned for being a bully as well. Rishi Sunak failed to sack him, so it's up to 4 now from that first cabinet. It's incredible, really, to reflect on.
It's just a joke. It really is just a joke. I mean, at the end of the day, you look at government and they're meant to be setting an example for everybody. But at the moment, I've just lost complete trust in it, because how can you have one bully you can accept, 2, you need to look at something, 3, hold on, there's something seriously wrong here.
But if your entire administration is built on, I can't say that word on the radio, if it's built on bull, then what pushes people forward? What makes you prominent? You've got to be both horribly wrong and horribly certain. So it's a climate in which Priti Patel can flourish, in which Suella Braverman can flourish, in which Liz Truss can flourish, in which Dominic Raab can flourish. It's a climate in which being able to shout and bully your way to the end of any meeting is the only way you're ever going to get to the end of any meeting. He obviously was worse at it than others. And less... Do you have any sympathy, Mark, for the notion of bullies who don't realise they're bullies?
No.
All right.
No, I got bullied severely at school.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I went to a funeral of someone his sister used to babysit me.
Oh yeah.
A couple of the bullies were there, and they were still at it then.
Really?
So they don't really realise what they've done, unless you tell them. And I've told them before, and I'm sure Dominic Raab's been told before. And it's just a case of, oh no, it's banter. Well, there's a thin line between banter and actually picking on somebody.
And the person who knows where that line is the person being picked on.
Yeah, and when they said, hold on, I'm being bullied here, you need to stop and have a serious conversation with it. I would die 1,000 deaths if someone said I was bullying them. I really would. And I'd want to sit down, I'd want to talk to them, I'd want to find out why I was bullying them, I'd want to apologise, I'd want to change my actions and work with them to make me a better person.
Mark, you're a legend. Thank you, mate. Thank you. Thoughtful insights and quite poignant ones as well. Two types, really. There's the banter, which comes up a lot when we're talking about institutional prejudices. Yesterday it was racism in the Met and the Greater Manchester Police, and the the hideous sight of the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police prioritising people who don't understand what institutional racism is over the feelings of people who are victims of it, which is the best proof we've found so far of what institutional racism actually looks like. So that's when the banter defence comes in. But then you've got what we might call should we call it the robustness defence? Oh, I'm not a bully. I just demand high standards. But you're an idiot who doesn't even know about the importance of Dover to Calais as a crossing for import and export of goods in and out of France and the European. Yes, I may be an idiot, but I still demand high standards from everybody around me. I'm Dominic Raab. Talib's in Wigan. Talib, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, yeah, I'm a bit nervous.
Take your time, mate. It's only me.
So, a bit like the last caller, big up to him, by the way. I was bullied at school, but to the point of, I don't really want to say on the radio, ending it, I suppose, is the softest way I can say it.
All right. I'm sorry to hear that.
It's okay. Luckily, my mum, unfortunately for her, she caught me, and but it has affected the rest of my life going forward. It kind of adds to who you are. And the reason I called was reading that letter. The thing that stuck out to me was when he said, in setting the threshold for bullying so low, is really insidious.
It's horrible.
Because they shouldn't, the threshold should be zero. It should be like,
of course
it's like saying setting the threshold for assault. So look, you know what I mean? It's like, some of it's okay.
Yeah.
But, and that just, and saying it sets a dangerous precedent, well, surely bullying for starters sets a dangerous precedent. It was just that really angered me. That
it's quite that's a really. I'm glad you've picked up on that actually, and Mark before you as well. I've seen a couple of people on Twitter describing it as exactly what a bully would say. But it's
what a coward would say.
Well, of course, it's what a coward would say. But all bullies are cowards. I think that's one thing on which everyone can agree, even if they're disputing whether or not this person deserves the description bully. But it's quite young to have this worldview, I think. I mean, I'm 51, and I came up through newspapers, which can be quite a brutal environment, and you end up kidding yourself that it's character forming. I went to public school as well, where bullying is rife and endemic, and you don't have the relief of going home at the end of the day. It's much, much worse when it's the teachers doing it than the boys, which was my experience. But you become inured to it. I don't know whether you did. You sort of kid yourself that this is character forming and it didn't do me any harm, and you've got to have a stiff upper lip. And yet I find people younger than me, the further down the age range you go, the more ridiculous that defence appears. And yet Raab is effectively saying, well, you've got to be able to bully people a bit in order to get them to do what you want. And that's pathetic.
Yeah, for a long time, I blamed myself.
Yes, exactly.
It was my fault. Why didn't I stand up? Why was I the coward? And it informs you going forward. And in the past year, I've started therapy. I'm 46 now. I started therapy, which has been the greatest,
isn't it?
Thing. Oh, incredible! I mean, I always say to people, don't let people force you into doing it. You need to do it at the right time for yourself.
Yes,
but
of course.
It's been amazing, and to be able to step back and now I understand things like triggers. So this obviously triggered me, and
you also the thing. I mean, I don't know what your therapy is like, what your experience is, but for me, it's you being encouraged to look after little you. You're being encouraged to look after the boy that you were, and oddly, if you don't do that, you can end up a bully. You can't. That's what I mean by building this fake thick skin. I believe in robustness. You can't make an omelette without cracking eggs. I'm Dominic Raab. If you can't stand the heat, get out of my kitchen. It's a frightened little boy desperately pretending that he's tough and not hurting inside.
It's weird that the excuse of this is a pressurized.
Well, it's always the same excuse.
But doctors are in a pressurized. I mean, I've got my own pressures. I make video games, so it sounds quite frivolous, but. It's still pressurised. Of
course it is.
It's actually pressurised. I don't then shout at someone who's a junior to me.
No.
No,
it's learned behaviour, and it can be unlearned. I think in my newspaper days, I did think that that's how you had to behave once you got a bit of seniority. You had to behave in the same way that the people behaved towards you when you were junior. But you either wake up and realise that it's wrong, or you end up not understanding why you've just lost your job as Deputy Prime Minister for being a bully when you're absolutely adamant that you're not a bully at all. And not only that, if you are a bully, then it's perfectly acceptable bullying, because if I'm not allowed to bully people, then I'm never going to get anything done.
Yeah. it ends up just being like a vicious circle because the people he's bullying will just end up taking that behaviour onwards.
Or they'll end up like us and seeking a little bit of help so that we can avoid, in your case, the dark path that you went down, and in my case, possibly becoming the thing that I found so repellent. Thank you, Talib. Brave call. And if you are affected by any of the issues that Talib touched upon, do remember that the Samaritans are there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 116 123. 10:45. Probably be talking about Raab for the bulk of the programme today. Anybody welcome. Everybody's welcome, always. 0345 6060 973. If it sounds disingenuous when I talk about Dominic Raab being a frightened little boy desperate to pretend that he's tough, I understand that criticism. It's not disingenuous. I don't, on a day like today, have any sympathy for him as a grown-up. But if you think about what makes somebody a bully, even the vilest figures in public life are dealing with trauma, almost always. The exception is the sociopaths, of course, which is why I make the inability to draw that distinction so clear. I can't tell you who's a sociopath and who isn't. I don't have the training or the knowledge. But generally speaking, people who are performatively obnoxious, people who are bullies, people who are deliberately unpleasant and then defend their unpleasantness and somehow persuade themselves that unpleasantness is a strength or a superpower or necessary, what they're really embarked upon is a lifelong campaign to convince themselves that they're not in pain. I know about this because it started for me when I was 10, getting beaten by a 6'4" man with a specially designed implement regularly. And the first thing you had to do after you'd been beaten was convince yourself and your mates that it didn't hurt. I'm fine. It didn't hurt. And you end up bottling that anger and that heart and that pain and that shame. And you bottle it so completely that you don't even acknowledge its existence. And you don't notice that what comes bubbling to the surface when you're bullying colleagues or even family members perhaps, or friends, what's bubbling to the surface is the anger and the pain and the shame that you felt as a child. So I do have sympathy for little Raab, but not at the moment, perhaps as much as I should have for big Raab, because I'm too busy feeling sorry for his victims. 10:51 is the time. Dominic Raab is toast following Nadeem Zahawi and Gavin Williamson out of the door. Is that the three? Suella Braverman, of course, got invited back in, despite having been found to have broken the ministerial code just a few days earlier. I'm tempted to do a phone-in at some point. Well, I will do a phone-in at some point on whether or not Rishi Sunak has put any clear blue water between his own administration and the utterly depraved administration of Boris Johnson. Liz Truss is she's sort of like I don't know what she is really. Her premiership, her administration is what is it? I mean, because I see Sunak as heir to Johnson. I see the passage of the baton from Johnson's hand to Sunak's hand. I forget about Liz Truss. She sort of got handed the baton, tripped over her own shoelaces, broke her nose, spilt it all over the track, and Rishi Sunak stepped over the lettuce, came along, picked it up and carried on running. So it's like a 3-leg relay where the second leg didn't really cover any track at all. She ran backwards by accident, really. So I don't see her as... But anyway, when What's His Chops talked about bringing back professionalism, accountability and integrity, he was talking about Boris Johnson, really, rather than Liz Truss. And I am interested in whether or not we think he has put any clear blue water. I mean, people are thrown out of his government, but largely they do the throwing themselves. I think Zahawi got handed his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap, but I think Williamson and Raab certainly were more prevailed upon to resign, which is a bit odd, given that Sunak's currently trying to cast himself as the tough guy to Keir Starmer's softie. So we don't need to get onto that now, because we're going to deal initially with immediate reaction to Dominic Raab's resignation for being a massive bully and coward. But the question of whether or not Sunak is managing to put any clear blue water, I mean, I think almost intuitively, emotionally, that he is. But when you look at the evidence and the facts, he isn't. I guess the nicest thing you could say is that, well, he is still governing with a cabinet full of absolute clowns, inevitably, because you've got to be supportive of Brexit to be in government. And if you're supportive of Brexit, I think we can all agree by now, then you're an idiot. So he has to do that, but he doesn't seem to be as supremely comfortable or as unaffected by it as Boris Johnson was. I don't know. Mary's in Esher. Mary, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello,
I'm a constituent of Dominic Raab, and yes, and on a couple of occasions I have written to him about different things. One of it was Brexit, one of it was in the dying days of the Johnson government, and I was telling him for his own self-esteem he should, resign from that government and not prop it up. And on each occasion that I wrote to him, the letters that the responses I got back were so shouty and self-righteous.
Really?
Oh, and so when yesterday I was hoping that he would have to, resign, I could almost have written the letter myself of how he would be justifying it. So it is so in character, with no apologies.
But no, that's not fair. There is an apology. I shall remind you. I shall remind you. I am genuinely sorry for any unintended stress or offence that any officials felt as a result of the pace, standards and challenge that I brought to the Ministry of Justice. That is, however, what the public expect of ministers working on their behalf. So you're quite wrong, Mary. He did apologise for the pace, challenge and standards that the public actually wanted him to introduce, which have been... It has been concluded that constitutes bullying, but we can't help him responsible for that because something Brexit something.
Yeah, I've also been, in the past elections, I attended a couple of hustings because, it is a very marginal. Well, it's become a marginal seat now,
yes.
And again, his whole demeanour and tone was. I know what I'm talking about, and basically, you, the Remainer audience, are know nothing.
Yes. I bet you knew about the importance of the Dover to Calais crossing, didn't you, before Brexit?
Yes,
yeah.
yes. And
it's 2016, really, when he became Brexit minister. He says in his letter that he's been a minister since 2015, but I think he was minister for paper clips and babby washing. 2016, when Theresa May was looking around for anybody that wasn't going to upset the Daily Mail. So the only people she could hire to important posts were, and I'm using this word a lot today, were idiots.
Yeah.
But that's quite a kind word to use because Dominic Raab was also a cowardly bully. So you remember David Davis?
Quite clever.
David Davis had first go. That's the kind of person she had to appoint to these absolutely crucial posts in order to keep the Daily Mail and the ERG happy. So Dominic Raab only comes into a position of prominence, a position of power, as a consequence of not understanding anything. It's incredible, really. That became the qualification. It arguably still is.
Yes, well, he did the groundwork, from the moment he was elected MP for Esher. He was very self-promoting, and I met him a few times on a professional level, and I've seen the charm.
Really?
Yes, I have seen the charm.
Gosh.
But you could always see that just a little bit underneath that was his true character.
Yeah, I genuinely think he's a truly nasty piece of work, and that has been evinced by the findings of this investigation. But my own sort of remote control run-in with him convinced me of that quite a while ago when he just lied about me on my own radio station. Obviously, I share the radio station with 1.3 something million other people, but you can't. I mean, that's the evidence of a bully and coward. Claim that I thought all Brexit voters were stupid racists, when I've always been clear that it's the Brexit cheerleaders and the leaders and the champions and the people like Dominic Raab that were either stupid or racist or both. Certainly not the people that they managed to bamboozle. Mary, thank you. Jackson Welsh. And then, of course, when I pointed it out and did a little collection of clips of him saying his own words, the snowflake blocked me on Twitter. I had to get the letter printed out today by someone else because I can't even read his tweets. Bless his little cotton socks. Jackson Welshpool. Jack, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that when you were reading out his letter, it was making my blood boil because I've experienced bullying when I was in primary school and high school. Throughout my whole childhood, I was bullied relentlessly. And in high school, there was this one particular guy that I just couldn't bear be in the same room as him. And after I finally left school and I was able to get on with my life, I went back to my local pub, and there he was.
Gosh.
And I gathered up the courage to go up to him, to basically turn around and go, he confronted me with all the things he did to me, and basically say, "You've made my life a living hell. Like, I've not been able to I've never been able to trust people because of you," because he was a conniving little narcissist who just came across as really lovely, and then he just started spreading stuff about me. And his whole thing was, "Oh, come on, mate, it's only character building." And then I turned and went, "So you're saying all you did to me and my best mate, who then committed suicide because of, not down to him, but in part due to the bullying that he did," his whole response was, "Oh, here's what it is."
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
And it took a lot of effort on my part, and from my best mate stood next to me to stop me from glassing him, because I was like...
I'm glad you didn't, obviously, and I'm so sorry that your best mate's no longer with us. And you mention it, and it's a well, these are the consequences ultimately of toxic environments created by toxic individuals. Jack, I wish I'd given you a bit longer, mate. I didn't realise your contribution was going to be so powerful, but it is now 11 o'clock and time for, the news. It's 3 minutes after 11. I've got a little collection going on here. Dear Prime Minister, Right Honourable Sir Gavin Williamson, CBE MP, still got his gongs, I think, despite having to resign about allegations of bullying. I don't know what's happened to that complaints process, actually. I've got the Nadeem Zahawi one here as well. And now I've got the Dominic Raab one. Do you think before the next general election I'll be adding to my little collection of resignation letters? I'll tell you someone who has reported on more political resignations than most of us. That is, of course, my friend and colleague Andrew Marr, who kindly joins me down the line now. Where does it sit in the sort of pantheon of comparable departures from high office, Andrew?
Well, there isn't much of a pantheon, James, in the sense of bullying allegations like this. I can't remember an example. I can remember lots of senior politicians who have behaved very aggressively in private over the years. But this is the first time someone's actually gone for it. I think a few things are really worth saying at the outset. This was a genuinely difficult decision, I think, for Sunak. Had he kept Raab, it would have been a huge distraction from his so-called 5 pledges, and the opposition would have gone on about it. I think there would have been legal challenges. I'm told there would have been legal challenges from former civil servants, and possibly protests and even resignations from inside the civil service. It would have been a huge distraction just ahead of the local elections. And it would have played into the narrative that Rishi Sunak is fundamentally a weak leader and the prisoner of his own benches. So clearly, in clinical, cold political terms, Sunak did exactly the right thing to get rid of Raab. However, I mean, these two guys are quite close. And, Raab stood by Sunak all the way through that long, sticky, hot, and really turbulent leadership campaign in the Tory party, even when it wasn't clearly in his interests to do so. So I assume they've talked overnight, and I think Sunak will have hated picking up the phone.
Well, you say that, and clearly he has been told that his situation had become untenable, but he hasn't necessarily headed off all accusations of weakness at the pass, because it's a different departure from, for example, Nadeem Zahawi's. Zahawi was explicitly sacked, whereas Raab, like Gavin Williamson before him, has been allowed to resign, as it were.
Is it a sacking or is it a resignation?
Well, precisely.
It's kind of hard to say. He was kind of halfway out the window himself and then pushed, I guess. Because if you look at his letter, he is still clearly stingingly angry. Let's just read just one paragraph. Listeners will have probably heard it already, but I'll read it again. In setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry, says Raab, has set a dangerous precedent. It will encourage spurious complaints against ministers and have a chilling effect on those driving change on behalf of your government and ultimately the British people. That is not somebody who is going happily.
It's not someone who's particularly contrite either, is it? It doesn't exactly drip with remorse.
It doesn't, does it?
I mean, oddly, his role as Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor more important than his role as Deputy Prime Minister? Not every Prime Minister has a Deputy Prime Minister, but this will effect a reshuffle, won't it? There'll have to be a bit of a rearranging of, I nearly said deck chairs, but that wouldn't be appropriate.
There's a stream of younger legally trained Tory MPs and ministers who might be given the job, including quite a few female ministers, interestingly, which would change the atmosphere a bit in that department, to say the least. So, yeah, it's going to be a reshuffle. I don't think it'll be a big reshuffle because, frankly, Sunak wants as little kerfuffle, as little trouble just ahead of these local elections where he's predicted to lose 1,000 councillors.
Of course. Finally, Andrew, is it now completely over? I don't think civil servants are permitted to really come forward with their testimony, are they? As you said, it may have shaken the tree a bit if he had not gone, but Raab doesn't seem set to launch any sort of appeal or retrospective justification of his action. So it is farewell then, Dominic Raab.
I think pretty much, he said that he was lawyered up. He must have dispensed with those lawyers already. We haven't, of course, yet seen, James, the real full report, the Adam report, and we will. And that will be in the Sunday papers, I imagine, in great detail. So it's not quite over this. But I think for Dominic Raab, it is over.
Andrew Mark, many thanks. Are back on air on Monday, 6 o'clock?
Back on air, 6 o'clock Monday. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Andrew. Live, of course, on LBC. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. It is interesting comparing these letters. Also, because I'm a bit of a child, comparing the signatures. Who do you think's got the most ridiculous signature? I don't know. Is it graphology, where you analyse handwriting? Which of the three, Zahawi, Raab and Williamson, do you think has the most, what would the word be, ostentatious signature and way of writing? The one that looks like he's been practising it on the back of his French exercise book. Which one do you think that would be? I'll tell you shortly. Back to the phones, which are open. 2 phone lines free now, first time since 10 o'clock. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I haven't really asked a substantive question. Quite a few people have come forward with their own experiences of bullying, which I would encourage. But I'm interested. I mean, am I going to get the diehard Tory Brexiter who is beginning to realise that all your heroes have feet of clay now? Who's left? Who have you still got on your wall? So, Rees-Mogg, well, they've made him a minister and he couldn't come up with any benefits. Johnson turned out to be even worse than his harshest critics predicted. And Nadine, she cares about me so much, she's writing newspaper columns and appearing on the telly instead of doing politics now. Anyone who else would be on that wall? David Frost, he appears to have taken leave of what little centres he had left, suggesting yesterday that the devolution should be reversed with regards to the Scottish Parliament. Who's still on the little wall? See, Sunak is not actually what you'd call an ardent Brexiteer. He was sort of a backseat Brexiter. I don't think he carries as much of a can for Brexit-related mess as other people do, but since Theresa May, they've only been able to appoint people that passed the ideological purity test set by someone like Paul Dacre, the then editor of the Daily Mail, who's desperate to be in the House of Lords. And guess what the front page of the Daily Mail is today? Unelected Lords plot to block Rwanda flight law. So down with the House of Lords. But please let me in it, says Paul. Please let me in the House of Lords. Please let me in. Down with the House of Lords on the front page of his paper. Please let me in the House of Lords. I think historians of the future will probably conclude that 90% of the Daily Mail's deferential defence, pathetic defence, utterly delusional defence of Boris Johnson was down to the fact that their editor-in-chief is desperate to get a seat in the House of Lords, and Boris Johnson is the only man corrupt enough to contemplate it. If you think I'm exaggerating, he tried to put Charles Moore in charge of the BBC and Paul Dacre in charge of Ofcom. Holy McMoly, as nobody says. Philip's in the Wirral. Philip, can you remember why you picked up the phone?
I can, James. I'm a massive fan, and thanks for speaking to
me. Of me or Dominic Raab?
No, of you. I can 100% assure you I'm not a fan of Dominic Raab.
I'd like to find one. The phone lines are open. There's a couple. 0345 6060 973. A Dominic Raab defender would be welcome, but that's not the role that you're filling today, Philip. What do you want to say?
No, I'm delighted he's gone. I think the whole Tory party needs to go in the next election, and just so you know exactly where I'm coming from. But I'm massively disappointed. I'm disappointed because this is a massive missed opportunity, and I just want to use an analogy. Please. And bear with me.
I will.
So Raab's a karate man, or martial arts, etc. Now, if you remember the Karate Kid film, you'll probably have an age that you will, and I definitely remember it.
I certainly do. I also remember the reboot with Jaden Smith in it. But let's go for the full Ralph Macchio original.
Exactly. And at the end of that film, this young lad's been massively bullied for years. It seems like.
Daniel-san. You're talking about Daniel-san.
Daniel-san, exactly. And Mr. Miyagi supports him and gets him through that tough time and says, you need to face your fears. You need to go into this competition. He was reluctant at first. Yeah. You need to go into this competition. The final scene is a brilliant scene. Anybody that's seen the film will agree.
He's practically got a broken leg, hasn't he, at this point?
Yeah, he's got a broken leg. I'm
tearing up here, Philip. Stop it.
Yeah,
This is.
And he looks at this guy who's ruthlessly bullied him, and he does this superb scorpion kick, I think it was called, or something like that.
It's the crane. He does the crane.
Okay.
He goes up on one leg because his other leg is not capable of supporting him. Really, he goes up on one leg and puts his hands. I'm doing it now in the studio. This better not go viral. And you're right. Carry on.
And the music's perfect. And then he does this kick, and then the crowd erupts, and everybody that watches it goes, yes.
Yes.
I've watched it with my own daughters and gone, yes, that's the moment. That's what should happen to bullies. And that's why I think the highest office in the land, Rishi Sunak, our supposed leader-in-chief, our Prime Minister, should have sacked him. No questions asked. As soon as that report arrived at his desk, he'd known the summary of it straight away. He should have been sacked, because that would have sent a message out to every other bully in every other institution across the land that you are accountable.
That's interesting.
You are accountable.
So what will happen now is that, and this is why Andrew and I just picked over the lack of clarity on resignation or dismissal. What will happen now, and I'm reading that some supporters, if you like, of Dominic Raab are saying it was an honourable resignation because Sunak didn't tell Raab to resign. He did it of his own volition. Yeah. But what you want to see is Rishi Sunak standing up and saying, look, I've known Dominic Raab for years. I had no idea that he was such a bar steward, and therefore I am sending him straight back to Coventry with no snacks and treats. I'm ashamed and embarrassed to have had this man in my government, and I apologise unreservedly for promoting him into a position for which he was so clearly unsuited. And that would be the metaphorical equivalent of getting kicked in the head by Daniel-san.
For me, it would be. For many other people may disagree, but I think it would send out a very strong message that this is zero tolerance. I'm sorry, you're not going to whitewash this. Yeah. You're not going to present yourself as honourable. You've not got a way back. This is it for you, Dominic Raab. This is it. This is what you are. This is what you always were. And for everybody that's been bullied out there across the country, whichever party they're affiliated, I'm clearly not affiliated to Blue in terms of I'm not a member of any party, right, but I would not vote Blue.
Well, you'd think we're all on the side of the other side to bullies. You'd like to think, but it doesn't sadly work like that, does it? Always. No. It's and
Rishi Sunak, if he was going to get any credibility, has lost it for me yet again. They had an open goal for me. This would have been the moment to say you are a strong leader, or show some semblance of strong leadership.
So he had an open goal, and he elected to become a commentator, really, or a spectator rather than an actual participant on the pitch.
He's a bystander. He's a bystander to bullying. And you hear that.
I'll tell you one thing, though, Philip. I don't know if you've noticed this.
What? No, sorry.
It means that it's no longer Mrs. Sunak that has non-dom status. It's now Mr. Sunak, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean...
You can have that for nothing! It's 11:16. It's 19 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you remember the Narcissist's prayer? I can't even remember which one of them it was, whose conduct first introduced us to the work of the poet Dana Craig, who got in touch on Twitter, actually, which was rather lovely. He's not going to be able to do that anymore. Now that the old blue ticks have been handed their sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap, a lot harder to find and contact people, a lot harder for me to see it as well. We may talk about that later or next week. I'm not sure. It depends how much of an appetite there is to continue the conversation about the resignation of the Deputy Prime Minister for bullying, which, as Andrew Marr reminds us, is more or less unprecedented. It's not the first time a very senior politician has been found guilty of bullying. It's the second time. Boris Johnson, of course, elected to leave Priti Patel in the Home Office and accepted instead the resignation of his independent advisor on ethics, which was a moment that you might have hoped the entire country, stroke media, might have realised was an emergency in our democracy, but no. Waved it through instead, as always. But the Narcissist prayer is incredible in the context of Dominic Raab's resignation letter, and I'm going to show you why. I'll read you the prayer in full, okay, and then we'll apply it to Dominic Raab's resignation letter. Because I'm not saying that he's a narcissist, necessarily, but if he walks like a narcissist and talks like a narcissist, then he certainly has a case to answer. So this is the Narcissist prayer. It's not, a technical text or anything like that, but it's a persuasive one, I think. That didn't happen. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, that's not a big deal. And if it is, that's not my fault. And if it was, I didn't mean it. And if I did, you deserved it. So the first line is easy. That didn't happen. He spent months denying that he'd done anything wrong. In fact, so arrogantly that he pledged to resign in the event of it being found that he had done something wrong, which is, of course, what happened this morning. So that didn't happen is easy, right? We can all agree on that. So we cross that one off. That didn't happen, tick. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. Oh, well, that's pretty easy too. In setting the threshold for bullying so low, this inquiry has set a dangerous precedent. So it wasn't that bad. And if it was, that's not a big deal. Let me find a bit for that. I am sorry for any unintended stress or offence that any officials felt as a result of the pay standards and challenge that I brought to the Ministry of Justice. So that's not a big deal, right? And if it is, that's not my fault. That is, however, what the public expect of ministers working on their behalf. So it's not my fault. It's your fault. It's actually your fault. It's your fault. Flipping heck. That takes the narcissist prayer to a whole new level. It's your fault because this is what you want me to do. I'm Dominic Raab. I'm a bully, and that's what the people want. It's the will of the people. Oh my God, it's Brexit again. So he's claiming that him being a bully is actually the will of the people, where you are the people. And if it was, I didn't mean it. Well, we've already touched on that, haven't we? I am sorry for any unintended stress or offence that any officials felt. I didn't mean it. And if I did mean it, you deserved it, which brings us back to that is, however, what the public expect of ministers working on their behalf. That's uncanny. It's almost as if he sat down to write a resignation letter that proves and endorses every single line of the Narcissist prayer. I'm almost tempted to congratulate him on such a complete reflection of what is described in that poem. That didn't happen. That's what he spent months saying. If it did, it wasn't that bad. That's what his resignation letter is dedicated to contending. And if it was, that's not a big deal. That's obviously stated in terms when he talks about how Mr. Tolley concluded that I had not once in 4.5 years sworn or shouted at anyone, let alone thrown anything or otherwise physically, blah, 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 blah. And if it is, that's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's what the people wanted. If I did, I didn't mean it. Unintentional hurt. And if I did, you deserved it. That is, however, what the public expect of ministers working on their behalf. Wow. And in fact, did we miss out the bit about pace and change or whatever that gibberish was about him trying to justify being unbearable, where he talks about, yes, as a result of the pace, standards and challenge that I brought to the Ministry of Justice. Incredible. And guess what newspaper he's chosen to write an article for? No, remember... No, it's not the Daily Mail. Daily Mail doesn't... Also, their website's a bit of a skip fire. Daily Telegraph. Home of the Save Owen Paterson campaign. Brexit would be going brilliantly if only people who explained why it was a rubbish idea had believed more. Home of David Frost, the negotiator of the withdrawal agreement that they were seeking to disown before the ink was dry on the signatures of the people that signed it. It's got to be the Daily Telegraph. And I've got that article. I will decide whether or not you deserve to have it inflicted upon you live on the radio during the course of the next few minutes. But let's get back to the phones. Polly is in. I'm going to pronounce this one wrong. Poncian.
You've done it before, James.
What?
You've done it before. Remember it. We've spoken before. Remember how it's...
Poncian.
Ponchan.
I should have known.
What's the girl's name?
Yeah, I know. Sorry. I've got a lot on. I'm busy at the moment. Got a lot of plates spinning, Paul. You know how it is. What do you want to say?
I do. Well, I just want to tell you my sort of personal story.
Yes.
Dominic Raab doesn't just bully people he works with. He bullies members of the public as well. And
radio presenters.
Yeah. I was on the receiving end of it. I mean, I'll fully admit he was Brexit secretary, and I was a Stop Brexit protester.
Yes.
I was outside Downing Street. We were waiting for Guy Verhofstadt. There was a group of us, and people were coming out of. There's a sort of side door or side gate, and people walked out of the side gate and walked down towards the House of Parliament. And a group of people went out and walked down. I didn't see who they were, and I had my little pink megaphone and I shouted "Stop Brexit," as you do. And one of this group disengaged themselves, so quite a long way from us, turned on their heel and marched straight back towards me. Now, bear in mind the fact that I'm 5'1", and I had a pink megaphone in front of my face, and this man came right into my personal space, lowered himself so that we were face to face, then got a pointy finger and pointed into my pink megaphone and said, "You haven't got a hope." And it was only as he then turned and walked away that I thought, oh my God, that was Dominic Raab.
Yeah.
And he was Brexit secretary at the time, as far as I know.
Was this before or after he realised the importance of the Dover to Calais crossing to the import and export of goods from...
Oh, that was before.
Before.
Yeah, I mean, MPs are supposed to behave with respect and decorum. And he then ran and caught up with his group of whoever these people he was with. So it was witnessed what he did. So the idea that nobody knew that he was a bully, when I don't know how tall he is, he's over 6 foot, and he thought it was all right to come up, very powerful man. He thought it was all right to come up to a woman in a pork pie hat outside the house.
Well, I was with you until you mentioned the pork pie hat.
Yeah, well, I've got the pork pie hat because I gave the pork pies to Aaron Banks, you see.
Oh, fair enough.
You know, that the Daily Mail christened me the pork pie protester, and I just had to go with it. So.
Well, I mean, I wasn't there. I'm unsurprised by what you describe, and that combination of arrogance and impunity seems ultimately to have done for him. Although it's undimmed, this sort of apologia in the Daily Telegraph, it essentially leaves the question hanging over why he's resigned at all, because he's just written a page and a half of text explaining that he never actually did anything wrong at all, and that the investigation agreed with him, and therefore why on earth has he resigned?
Exactly, but he doesn't think he has done anything wrong. It literally oozes out of it. It's this privilege that he has. It's like when he talks...
But what's it built on? Because he's as thick as mince. Where does it come from?
Oh, well, sorry, James, it goes back to your public schools, doesn't it?
Did he go to... Are you sure he went to public school?
I don't know.
I don't know that he did, actually. I mean, you can...
Complex, then.
You can come out of public school with a slightly inflated opinion of your own intelligence, but also sometimes you can come out realising that what you've been taught are the skills that you need to mask a lack of intelligence. I don't know where he went to school, actually.
I don't. Well, we'll look up and see, shall we? But he's a horrible bully, and it's not just. He doesn't just do it. He doesn't just do it online. He is so convinced of himself and of his rights.
I disagree.
Right to rule.
I think he's constantly in fear of being found out, and this is true of all bullies. The more he blusters and the more he bullies and the more he kind of acts like someone who knows exactly what he's doing, the more he can kind of kid himself in the small hours of the morning that he isn't actually making it all up as he goes along, and he's only been promoted into government because of his support for something that he didn't really understand, but he knew it would curry favour in the right quarters to get ahead in that brief window of British government. But I'm sorry for what you went through. You went to a selective grammar school in Amersham in Buckinghamshire called Dr. Challoner's Grammar School. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to contemplate Dominic Raab's resignation, the latest chapter of which is an article he's written for the Daily Telegraph, in which he concludes, this precedent sets the playbook for a small number of officials to target ministers who negotiate robustly. It's always that word robustly that appears, isn't it, when bullies are explaining why they're not bullies. I'm not a bully, I'm just robust. Robustly on behalf of the country, pursue bold reforms and persevere in holding civil servants to account. If that is now the threshold for bullying in government, it is the people of this country who will pay the price. So there you have it. Dominic Raab has been found to be a bully. He's been compelled to resign as a consequence. But do you know who's really going to regret this? You. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It is 32 minutes after 11. Raab has gone and Rishi Sunak has responded, and the report has just been published. So no prizes for guessing that we won't be moving on just yet. I can tell you that Adam Tolley, the King's Counsel who conducted the inquiry, has praised civil servants for the group complaint that paved the way for others to come forward, saying they deserve credit for their courage in coming forward. Dominic Raab, meanwhile, is essentially maligning them in his article for The Telegraph. I suspect that will get buried now that the report itself has been published, but it's an unpleasant piece of prose talking about essentially trying to malign his accusers. Indeed, at one point he said he'd received an informal tip-off that unionised officials were targeting him and other ministers. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, mate. That's how these things work. And Rishi Sunak has now published his response to Dominic Raab, which is interesting. Here we are. Thank you for your letter notifying me of your decision to resign from your position. It was great, as I said, when I became Prime Minister in October last year, I pledged that the government I lead would have integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. The ministerial code requires ministers to uphold the highest standards. Well, he doesn't add, of course, but I will. I also reappointed Suella Braverman to the position of Home Secretary 6 days after she'd been compelled to resign for breaking the ministerial code that I'm pretending here to really care about. So Sunak might be a slightly more plausible character than Liz Truss or Boris Johnson, but he's not necessarily any more upright. When formal complaints about your conduct in different ministerial posts were submitted last year, I appointed at your request an independent investigator to conduct a full investigation into the specific facts surrounding these complaints. Adam Tolley KC has now submitted his report, and I have carefully considered its findings, as well as consulting the independent advisor on ministers' interests. Of course, he doesn't add, I didn't have an independent advisor on ministers' interests at the time because the two previous occupants of that post had resigned in protest at my predecessor Boris Johnson, who I was happy to serve as Chancellor, riding completely roughshod over the findings and the advice of his ethical advisors up to and including the point where they resigned in protest at his own complete lack of ethics. I, however, was happy to continue as Chancellor of the Exchequer after both of those resignations. As you say, you had rightly undertaken to resign if the report made any findings of bullying whatsoever. You have kept your word, but it is clear that there have been shortcomings in the historic process that have negatively affected everyone involved. We should learn from this how to better handle such matters in future. And then he goes on to list Dominic Raab's achievements in government, adding these achievements should make you extremely proud. Would it be grossly unfair of me to invite the next caller, without any warning whatsoever, to have a guess at what those achievements in government actually are? Because I haven't got a Scooby-Doo. It's 11:35. Lee's in Watford. Lee, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I'll have a go, James. Good morning.
What were his achievements in government?
Well, he loves a sunbed, right?
You're not taking this entirely seriously, Lee.
No, I'm taking it very seriously. Actually, I feel actually very sorry for Dominic Raab,
yes.
And actually probably Braverman, Jenrick, and a few others. Right?
I just want to double check. You're not, and there's no problem if you are, but you are being sincere. You're not doing a tongue-in-cheek little comedy routine.
I'm genuinely being
good.
Sincere,
Okay, then absolutely we must hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so as a victim of bullying through secondary school, I think a lot of your listeners are probably going to recognise that most bullies they ever encountered were bullied themselves.
Yes, I think that's probably true.
Okay, so, this is a net response to bullying, right, that these people are responding to, and it's kind of filtered into their professional life, probably their university life, their professional life, everything else. I've got a few friends down in Esher that have seen Raab with, his good wife, and it's pretty clear he's probably bullied domestically as well.
Whoa! That's libel, mate. So take that back. That was tongue in cheek. You can't say that.
No, that's not tongue in cheek. But look.
Well, it is.
A serious point here is that I think most bullies always result from bullying, right? So there's got to be some sympathy.
But where is the? I mean, I don't disagree with you. We've explored this territory, I think, quite powerfully. But at what point does your sympathy for the victims not only kick in, but also trump any sympathy you may have for the backstory of the bully?
Yeah. There's no doubt that these people shouldn't be in government. They shouldn't be anywhere near any, kind of remit of power, as anyone who's ever dealt with a bully would probably agree, right? And look, it isn't just Raab, right? There's another 7 or 8 in this cabinet. I think fundamentally, the victimhood is definitely for the victims, right? And the civil servants.
I don't know that he should really be allowed to continue this attempt to malign his accusers or to excuse his behaviour, while they, I think, are bound to stay silent. I don't disagree with you, Lee. A modicum of sympathy, if not for grown-up Raab, then certainly for little Raab, because you don't end up like this. It's probably why he started doing karate, actually. It's often the way, isn't it? It's certainly the way in The Karate Kid, which was brought up so movingly by Philip. You're having a tough time of it at school, and so your dad takes you to karate classes. And Raab's dad, of course, was a refugee from the Nazis. Raab, of course, remains a member of the government that seeks to demonise refugees at almost every turn. So there's quite a lot going on there psychologically, that's for sure. Thank you, Lee. Alan is on the Wirral. A lot of action in your neck of the woods yesterday for Farewell to Paul O'Grady, Alan. It was incredibly moving stuff.
It certainly is. Didn't forget his roots.
They didn't, did he? It was lovely to see some of that footage.
Lovely human being.
I think you're right. Where were we?
Yeah, this Dominic Raab thing. I don't have sympathy.
No, I'm not relaunching the show with a question after Lee's call saying, "Do you feel sorry for Dominic Raab?" That's not certainly not going to.
It's good to get that off my chest, though.
Yes, indeed, it is, isn't it? I don't feel sorry for him.
This is the effect of poor leadership, and this is the effect of people who have positions of accountability who are not willing to take advice.
Yeah.
This is someone who's and this behaviour is you behave in a way which you behave in a way you get rewarded for that behaviour, so you behave that way again. And what we've seen from Raab is this, and it's probably endemic of quite a lot of ministerial behaviour over the course of the last 13 years, because we've turned experts into so-called experts.
I think it starts in 16, not 10, actually. I mean, this isn't a hill I'm going to die on. But what you describe, not being able to listen to experts, not being able to listen to advice, is the consequence of a quasi-ideological belief in something that doesn't stand up to evidential scrutiny. And that is the problem. That's why he gets appointed, because he's a true Brexiter, and everyone had to be a true Brexiter. But the minute they get into civil service conversations and they are confronted with reality, like David Davis turning up without any notes to negotiate with, I think it was Barnier, or like Raab finding out about the Calais to Dover crossing, the only way you can get to the end of that meeting is by bawling out the people telling you that you're an idiot, but they're doing it politely and you're not responding in a polite fashion.
So what we have now is, and I feel really sorry for all the people who have called in with their stories, because the idea of this being in any way honourable must be as triggering as reading the letter itself.
That's a really good point.
It's horrific. Rishi Sunak is now running out of deck chairs to rearrange on the deck of the Titanic, because there's no one left. And there's no one left to be able to try and take this message. It was the Transport Minister this morning on the news cycle who was trying to block all the questions with regards to Dominic Raab. And there's no influx of anything new, any sort of idea that would look to change anything ahead of the election and
You're talking about the general election.
97.
But it does. They're 28.8% around. I mean, nodding around the 30% part in the polls. There is clearly a huge portion of the country who watches all of this unfold and either doesn't care or thinks that it would somehow be worse if these people weren't in power, which is an amazing position to have ended up in. But here they are.
Well, we are told by some that at some point it shouldn't matter, and that we shouldn't take, haven't we heard it all enough, and hasn't it all gone on too far? I mean, even yourself this morning, James, you kind of glossed over what Liz Truss did, and you can't do that.
I didn't mean to. It's just not that relevant to the conversation about Dominic Raab. I don't think I give Liz Truss an easy ride, but I'll take it. I mean, I'll take your critique on the carry on.
No, but it's like she did it almost accidentally.
Yes.
She didn't. She did it deliberately, maliciously. She is already doing the tools to be able to kind of turn around and back up her actions about, well, if I had my time over again, I just feel that with regards to what Raab has done, and Sunak's done nothing, that it's endemic of this leadership of, I'm the minister, so I will lead from the front, and it's your job to tell me that I'm right, rather than tell me the best way to be able to lead the country.
That's a great point. And anyone who's not telling me that I'm right is going to get treated really, really badly, and it's their fault, because you have to deal with the pace and the change and the rest of it. Some feedback, some nuggets now coming in from this report in which Tolly finds that on a number of occasions in the Ministry of Justice, Raab acted in an intimidating manner, going further than appropriate in delivering critical feedback and being insulting about work done by officials, which is always utterly unnecessary. I don't have much experience of management, but if you really want people to produce their very, very best work, then they need to feel valued and respected. He describes some of their work as utterly useless and woeful. This is Dominic Raab calling other people's work utterly useless and woeful, and he did not intend to upset or humiliate, but Tolly says officials found him unreasonably difficult to deal with. He was abrasive, and while Raab has regulated his level of abrasiveness, he should have altered his approach earlier. He then also praises civil servants, as I said, for having the courage to come forward. More on that as and when it appears. Should we catch up with the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, after this? Yeah? All right, if you insist. 11:48 is the time. I've got a bit of an inkling that Angela Rayner is not going to be available for interview immediately because she's on the telly. She's currently talking on Sky News, so we will be catching up with the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party in a broadcast exclusive. We'll be catching up with the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party probably after 12 noon. I'm just joining in with everybody else, claiming it's an exclusive when it isn't. So as soon as Angela Rayner has finished on Sky News, she will be talking exclusively to me on LBC. Can I read you something funny? It made me laugh. I have to change the names involved. My mate Chris, who I haven't seen for decades, but remember very fondly from our school days together, has just been in touch to say, just listening to you on Dominic Raab, do you remember, and I'm going to say Bilbo Baggins, I'm going to invent a name because it wouldn't be fair to name the lad. Do you remember Bilbo Baggins at prep school? He was getting picked on, so his dad sent him to kung fu classes. Talking about Dominic Raab being a karate kid. He says, I don't think it turned him into a bully, though. He knocked himself out with his nunchucks. Sounds like something off Blankety Blank. He says, I don't think it turned into a bully. He knocked himself out with his blank. And it's nunchuck. Do you have to know the lad? Do you have to remember Bilbo Baggins to find that? I just thought that was very, very funny. And speaking of my magnificent inbox, for which I remain eternally grateful to you, 3 texts in pretty quick succession. Do you think Dominic Raab was bullied? Text number 1, unsigned. Text number 2, also unsigned. I was at Challengers with Dom and he wasn't bullied. Which leads us to text number 3 from Max in Southend, who says, I'm really not convinced that these bullies were ever victims themselves. I genuinely believe that they were natural-born sociopathic narcissists. Which takes us back to the narcissist prayer, which we've already examined through the lens of Dominic Raab's resignation letter and concluded that there is almost certainly a case to be answered. I've got the 47-page report in front of me. Formal complaints about the conduct of the Right Honourable Dominic Raab MP, Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. Investigation report to the Prime Minister. But, I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I don't know why you've given it to me. What am I going to do? I'm live on the radio. Shall I open it at random and read a line and just see what happens? Yeah? You ready? In light of the nature of the complaints, which are concerned with the manner in which the Deputy Prime Minister interacts with civil servants, it is necessary to make some general findings about the Deputy Prime Minister's style of working as a minister in order to provide context for the findings which follow in relation to the complaints. Blimey, it's quite dry, isn't it? No wonder it's 47 pages. He has strong principles and is guided by them in practice. He works assiduously and typically from 7:30 until 10 o'clock, Monday to Thursday. Fridays are allocated to constituency work. He seeks to use meetings with policy officials in order to test the relevant material. In his the DPM style is, in his own words, inquisitorial, direct, impatient and fastidious. He told me that he tends to prepare extensively for meetings. An important part... This was a great idea, wasn't it? Reading it up and finding a line at random. Should I do it again? An employer owes a legal... No, it's just very, very, very dry. We'll get the juice as and when it has been yielded. If you want to join in, 0345 6060 973. Quite a few of you going down the sociopath line. I'm not convinced that this is bullying in the traditional sense of the word, James, as bullies normally pick on specific people. This sounds more like sociopathic behaviour. That'd be great. I wouldn't put it past him. I'm not a bully. I'm a sociopath. And therefore I deserve more sympathy. Ben's in Hales Owen. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. Well, look, we live in an age of political minnows, especially with our current government having drained all their talent, even if you disagreed with it, over the last sort of 6 years.
Yeah.
And there's two observations about this sort of thing. One is this idea that driven people need to bully to be successful. That's just not true. If you go into any business, large business or small businesses, franchise businesses, the people at the top of those businesses are quite often inspiring people who understand that to get success and to get the results, you have to take people on the journey. I've had great bosses who we have a 2-day meeting with, and they've got a plan.
Yeah.
And this meeting could have been 5 minutes where they said, this is what you're going to do. But they spend 2 days allowing everybody to talk about it, explore it, and get on board with it. And then guess what? It works. So these people now just haven't got the skills. You know, they're bad managers rather than leaders. And I think this, you know, you mentioned a lot earlier in the show, Alan Partridge. Well, I'm going to mention another Armando Iannucci sitcom, which is The Thick of It. And unfortunately, we've got a generation of politicians that are cosplaying a TV character in Malcolm Tucker from The Thick of It.
Yes.
That's how they think, you know.
Yes.
He was probably loosely based on Alistair Campbell, but there's two things. One, Alistair Campbell was immensely successful, and two, he was a real person. Malcolm Tucker has never been a real person. He was a caricature and a cartoon that made great television.
I think that's a really good one. That's a really good spot for Raab, actually, because this stuff about he's in the office all the time and he works really hard. It's as if he's trying to convince himself that he's up to the job, not never mind the people around him, and by blustering but if I'm the loudest person in the room, that means I've got the strongest grasp of my brief. It's very, very, very sad, isn't it?
There's no strategy, is there, James? Because there's no thinking beyond the immediate, and this is why they're cosplaying. I mean, if you look at The Thick of It, the actual hero of that is probably the One Nation Tory MP.
Yes, I give you that. Don't lose the room, though. Not everybody's watched it. What's incredible is this self-depiction of him as being so incredibly committed. He still couldn't find the time to read the Good Friday Agreement, could he, when he was Foreign Secretary or before becoming Foreign Secretary?
It's details, though, isn't it, James? And unfortunately, these people are so hyped up with their own egos that they think the details are for other people. And when you look at, you know, the giants, if you look at Tony Blair and what he's just done, you know, the Good Friday Agreement and his speeches on that, you know, it's a different level to anything we've seen for a decade. You know, leaders put their leadership in peril for the good of their people. We don't see that now.
Point. That's interesting. So they do what is right. I suppose you could argue you see it with Macron on the retirement age stuff. I was thinking about that the other day, doing something that is obviously unpopular because you truly believe that the country needs it. This lot are the opposite. They do something that is incredibly popular, which is going to absolutely screw the country for short-term personal gain. Thank you, Ben. 11:54 is the time. This is interesting. Kate Maltby, I think, writing in the newspaper or on the website today. She is, of course, a columnist over there. I'd forgotten this. 8 people have been left in there. 8 formal complaints. This is, they don't include the time. So you've got complaints from when Raab was Brexit Secretary, Justice Secretary, Foreign Secretary, under respectively May, Johnson, May and Johnson. They don't include the time he spent as Chief of Staff to David Davis, which remains the subject of a confidential settlement after a female employee in that office accused Raab of bullying back in 2007. The Tories were not in power. This report only covers their actions while in government. Raab has since said that he had no choice over the decision that Davis made to settle the case, which remains the subject of a confidentiality clause. It was Maya Angelou, of course, who said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Ben Kentish is LBC's Westminster editor. He's had a little bit longer than I have to filter through this 47-page report. What have you found, Ben?
Well, it's quite damning on two occasions, James, about Dominic Raab's behaviour. Two specific complaints that in his letter he referred to being upheld. One relating to his time as Foreign Secretary, one relating to his time as Justice Secretary. The details are vague in order to protect the people complaining, the claimants in these cases. But let's just go through the conclusions that Adam Tolley makes about them, starting with the Foreign Office case. He says this, in reaching and implementing the management choice that Dominic Raab did, he acted in a way that was intimidating in the sense of unreasonably and persistently aggressive conduct in the context of a work meeting. It also involved an abuse or misuse of power in a way that undermines or humiliates. He introduced an unwarranted punitive element. And in relation to the complaints made by a group of officials, not one, but multiple officials at the Ministry of Justice, Adam Tolley concludes this. On a number of occasions at meetings with policy officials, the Deputy Prime Minister acted in a manner which was intimidating, in the sense of going further than was necessary or appropriate in delivering critical feedback, and also insulting, in the sense of making unconstructive critical comments about the quality of work done, describing some work as utterly useless or woeful, for example, which Adam Tolley, James, is particularly critical of. That said, there's quite a lot of mitigation in here. Adam Tolley says time and time again that he doesn't believe the Prime Minister was being intentionally nasty or unpleasant. He says he was being abrasive rather than abusive, and so on.
So it comes naturally to him then, rather than...
It's about management style. There's a really interesting line where Adam Tolley says this. Some of the complainants included the contention that the Deputy Prime Minister intended to conduct himself in the way that he did. I am sure that this is correct. There was no question on the evidence of him losing control. So this isn't about Dominic Raab just seeing red time and again and shouting and screaming at people. In fact, Adam Tolley says there's no evidence of shouting and screaming at all. This is about an intentional management style that Dominic Raab, in his defence, says he believes was necessary to get things done in government and meet the standards that he expects, but that Adam Tolley concludes at times was not appropriate. There's one final point, I know I've got to wrap up, James, one final point to touch on that's really quite significant, and that is, on multiple occasions, Dominic Raab was told, according to senior civil servants, that his behaviour was unacceptable. Firstly, Sir Philip Barton, the top senior civil servant at the Foreign Office, warned him that he shouldn't be threatening officials with disciplinary conduct. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, disputed that any such conversation had occurred.
Wow.
Adam Tolley concludes, on this point, I prefer the evidence of Sir Philip. So there was a row over whether that conversation had happened at all. Dominic Raab said it didn't. Sir Philip said it did. Adam Tolley concludes that he believes Sir Philip. He says his evidence was convincing, and I do not think he had any good reason to make up such a conversation. Similarly, Antonia Romeo, the senior civil servant, the top civil servant at the Ministry of Justice, says on multiple occasions she had raised concerns with Dominic Raab over his treatment of civil servants. Adam Tolley says the Deputy PM sought to challenge the reliability of these notes, contemporaneous notes, on various grounds. Adam Tolley says, I was not convinced by those challenges and did not consider that Ms. Romeo would have had any reason to manufacture or manipulate the content of those notes. So what you have there, James, senior civil servants saying repeatedly they warned Dominic Raab about his behaviour, him saying, no, they didn't, and Adam Tolley saying, I believe they did.
Yes, they did, which makes him either incredibly forgetful or a massive liar, as well as a bully and a coward. Those are my words, obviously, Ben Kentish, not yours. You mentioned he believed he needed to adopt this approach in order to get things done in government. As LBC's Westminster editor, consider yourself about to be ambushed. What did he get done in government, do you think?
That's a good question. He would point to some of the things he achieved during Brexit. James, as Foreign Secretary, he would point to some of the reforms that he started making.
You're lucky we're mates now, because if you were a normal caller, I'd be going, go on, give me some examples. Some of the things he did during Brexit. Come on, Kentish, what have you got?
Well, he will say he was involved in negotiating that deal. Indeed, one of the complaints, James, relates to supposedly Brexit negotiations relating to Gibraltar, in which he got annoyed that officials weren't acting in his favour. So he would no doubt say that he played an integral role as Brexit secretary and later as foreign secretary in delivering the Brexit deal that Boris Johnson agreed and later Rishi Sunak built on. But you're right, there will be his critics who say, actually, for all his talk at obstructiveness in the civil service, what has he actually got to show for it? Perhaps his allies will say, well, that's the exact point, that he wasn't able to get enough done. They will say, not because he wasn't effective as a minister, but because of the so-called Whitehall blob, that it seems he at least, and increasingly those around him and supportive of him, seem to want to blame for his dismissal.
Indeed. Alternatively, of course, he could have got perhaps a lot more done if he had a team that were feeling cherished, valued and respected. That is touched on, James, just briefly. Adam Tolley does say that it would be conducive to sort of a better government and staff morale and people getting things done had Dominic Raab not spoken to them in the way that he at times did. Will you see him, do you think, in the near future? See Raab? I suspect. Well, he's written, as you say, he's written in the Telegraph. He's not going to go down without a fight. He's not going down without a fight. I used to be keen for him to unblock me on Twitter because he was Deputy Prime Minister. If you just pass on, I don't really care anymore either way. Will do. Thanks, Ben. 1 minute after 12 is the time you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's 5 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There is a kind of feeding frenzy, if you like, over this report now. But I think Ben has brought us the juiciest morsels. We continue to contemplate some of the ramifications of this. If I had to summarise, if you were just tuning in, Dominic Raab has a very obnoxious manner in his work communications. I suspect he's hugely sycophantic to people above him in the food chain. I think we've all come across people like that, haven't we, in our careers? I'm terrible at this because I get told people are awful. And I say, but they always seem perfectly pleasant to me. And then the producer or someone else or Keith will say, yeah, well, obviously they're not going to be like that towards you, but they treat us appallingly. And I'll go, oh, crikey. But you know people like that. So I bet when he's in a room with Johnson or with Sunak or with anyone he sees as sort of being above him in the food chain, I bet he's sycophantic, and therefore people will come forward as, well, I've never seen anything like this about, or even people he perhaps perceives as his equals. But he gets into the Foreign Office or the Ministry of Justice and he's surrounded by people who really, really know their stuff. It's a weird thing. I don't know if you've noticed it. Thick people in power criticising really, really clever people that they should really be extremely polite to, because the clever people can protect you from the consequences of your own thickness. But people like Rees-Mogg and Raab are too thick to realise that the only people who can protect them from their own thickness are the civil service. So they attack the civil service. And they attack everyone. They attack the IMF, the OECD, the OBR, the Bank of England, the European Union, the European Court of Human Rights, and their own civil service. It should come a point, anyone with a modicum of intelligence, there'd come a point where, hang on a minute, maybe we're the baddies. And we're attacking absolutely everybody, up to and including the civil servants, because they all refuse to believe in Brexit. Maybe Brexit's a really bad idea. So what the civil servants are doing is explaining how you can mitigate the damage, but you can't admit that there's going to be any damage. So he's clearly a very obnoxious man when he's in a room with people to whom he doesn't feel deference. He's too obnoxious to realise how obnoxious he is. And he thinks that being obnoxious, because it's such a crucial part of his self-protection personality, being obnoxious is the only way in which he can persuade himself he's actually robust or tough or capable. The obnoxiousness becomes absolutely part of him. It's not necessarily part of him. That's the difference between a sociopath and a bully. We don't know, although I'm leaning, the longer we talk about this, I'm leaning more and more towards sociopath, actually. He's utterly devoid of empathy or any understanding of how he appears to other people. But anyway, that's where we are. That's what it has found, and therefore, inevitably, he has to come out blaming it on everybody else, claiming that he's not really done anything wrong, and casting himself as some sort of victim, which is rendered ridiculous by the contents of the actual report that has led to his resignation. What an almighty mess this is. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. Waiting for Angela Rayner to join us. We'll find out from her shortly what her response to, of course, because they would meet across the dispatch box, wouldn't they, at PMQs when the Prime Ministers were elsewhere. Mike's in Bridgend. Find out what Mike's got to say. Mike, what's on your mind?
I'm just wondering about the total cost to personally, to the economy, to everything, to people's lives. The total, if you could put a figure, like a monetary figure, on how much damage the way people like Dominic Raab behave, it would be astronomically high, because it's just multiplied hundreds of thousands of times across on a daily basis across the country repeatedly, and so it's just a perpetual causing of damage by people like that.
Yes.
And there's never been any counting done for how much, because it's difficult to work out. There's never any accounting done for, well, how much is that costing the NHS? How much is that costing people from missed hours of work? How much is that costing people's lives? There's never any accounting done for that, because it's just called bullying rather than abuse.
Yes,
what it is.
Of course. Go on.
If I'm in a meeting with somebody and somebody presents me a report they've worked on, I can assume they've worked on it as best they can. And I say, what is this rubbish? And I throw it back across at them and I say, this is filth.
Yeah.
Then fundamentally, that is abuse. It's not bullying. I'm being abused. I'm abusing that person.
It'd be interesting to know the detail, wouldn't it? Because I imagine that what we're looking at here, in at least some cases, particularly at the Foreign Office and the Brexit Department, would have been him saying, bring me some unicorns, and then writing reports that say, well, we can't find any unicorns, but here are some donkeys with ice cream cones stuck to their foreheads. And then he kicks off because his entire political success is built upon selling unicorns to the British people back in 2016.
It sounds to me like a lot of the abuse took place in settings where there was multiple people. So basically part of the abuse is, look at me, I'm taking this person down in front of you all.
Yes.
Watch it, everybody watch out, I'll take you down next. Basically, I think fundamentally the cost of that kind of behaviour across the entire country is uncalculable, because
that's a very, very good point. And in fact, it's one I'll put immediately to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. We can't, Angela, thank you for joining us. We can't put a figure, a monetary figure, upon the kind of damage that is done by behaviour like this, can we? But can we put a sort of political figure on it, or the damage done to the reputation of government, the reputation of democracy itself? And actually, first of all, how shocked are you that he's guilty, given your dealings with him over the years?
I mean, I'm not shocked that he was found guilty, because the context to the victims coming forward was these were not one or two victims. These were a lot of victims that came forward from very different departments in the civil service. They didn't know each other. So this idea there was some conspiracy is absolute rubbish. And, you know, they came forward after the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson allowed a bully in the cabinet to stay on when a civil servant was sacked after being found that they had been bullied against. So they had their complaint upheld, and the cabinet member stayed in their job and the civil servant had to leave. So for them to come forward under that context means that they must have felt pretty devastated and compelled, even though they knew that they risked losing their job, because it wasn't a hypothetical, it happened previously. So this is very dangerous, the idea that civil servants are conspiring against ministers. It doesn't happen. The civil servants have the utmost integrity. They work on behalf of the British people. They need to feel confident that they can challenge decisions in a constructive way if they think it's wrong and damaging. And this will just set a tone that says they cannot do that, and they cannot act in the interests of the British people. And that should concern every single one of us.
Because the hardest and most important part of their job would be telling politicians things that they didn't want to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I'm a politician. My team have to tell me sometimes, no, that's not a good idea, Ange. And therefore, I have to accept that happens. But I also acknowledge that the relationship imbalance between me as a leader and them as my staff, I have their future in my hands. So for them, you have to be able to give people confidence to tell you things you don't want to hear. And the best leaders, by the way, understand that. The best leaders bring people around them that will challenge them and have a difference to them. And what this has done by trying to rubbish the report, Rishi Sunak being weak not to take action, and then in the letter that he sends back to Dominic Raab, which is basically backslapping him, is not acknowledging what's happened at all, brings the conduct of politicians at that senior level into disrepute. And I think it is a dangerous precedent to allow that to happen. And Rishi Sunak, I think his response was appalling as a leader. He's not a leader, he's weak, and he should have taken this as a serious allegation that has been upheld by a KC who investigated it, and he should have been very clear and unequivocal that this is unacceptable, and he should have gone, and he shouldn't have appointed him in the first place because he knew about it.
And should he have been suspended while the investigation was underway?
Well, in normal workplaces, that would have happened. In normal workplaces, that happens. We have conduct issues with members of Parliament where they're suspended in the Labour Party if allegations are put forward of serious nature of this manner. It just seems like, we've got Conservative MPs who have had serious wrongdoing. They're taken off the whip for a short period of time and then they're just brought back in. It's like the culture in the Conservative Party think, well, we'll just get over this hump. It's just a bit of bad press and then we'll be okay in the future.
Right,
it's not acceptable.
I don't know about the bad press. There might be a couple of articles that are critical, but the Daily Mail will almost certainly be blaming it on snowflakes before tea time today, won't they? It's a bad-ish press.
Well,
maybe in some quarters.
Some don't, but majority of our press actually understand and know that they have to challenge people in positions of power. And if people in positions of power think it's okay to humiliate and to behave in the conduct that is outlined in the report from Dominic Raab, I think we've got a real problem at the heart of government. And Rishi Sunak has not dealt with it at all. He's been completely weak.
Do you know, a bit of a not a non sequitur, but a bit of a tangent, what happened to the complaints procedure with regard to Gavin Williamson? Because when he resigned, he said he was doing so while the complaints procedure could unfold. Has that finished? Has it gone away? Has everyone else forgotten about it?
Well, this is the issue. I've got a spreadsheet of the amount of letters that I've sent. We didn't even have an independent advisor for a long period of time. It's been like whack-a-mole for me, trying to, as the shadow cabinet office, in trying to keep their conduct at a level that is right. We've got ministers still now who have been found to have acted unlawful that are still ministers of the Crown. It is absolutely shambolic. Rishi Sunak has been in the job for over 6 months now. He said he was going to clear this up, and this is his first test, and he's failed miserably.
It is, I suppose. Well, what happens at PMQs now? Sorry, I didn't realise you were going to stop talking then, Angela. I'm normally sitting here waiting for a slightly longer spiel, so I didn't have another question prepared. What happens at PMQs now? Who
am I going to face?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Rishi Sunak, there was reports that he's not going to appoint a deputy prime minister now, so it could be anyone really. But I think the real problem that the Conservatives have now, whoever is up at Prime Minister's questions, is that their record of the last 13 years is not a good record, whether that's on conduct issues, on the issues we've seen with public money and the way it's been spent, or actually on cost of living and the day-to-day crisis we see in our NHS. I think there's enough ammunition there that, quite frankly, anyone who you face is going to, I think that's a sticky wicket for any of the government ministers to defend.
And finally, there is some dispute over whether it's resignation or dismissal. You clearly see it as a resignation brought about presumably by Rishi Sunak making it clear that the position had become untenable. But that leaves Rishi Sunak. What would the rationale be here? Why would Rishi Sunak not sack him? Why would he make it look or allow it to look like a resignation? Because with Nadeem Zahawi, to refer back to your spreadsheet, with Nadeem Zahawi, Sunak pulled the trigger, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been heavily choreographed by Dominic Raab and by Rishi Sunak. They knew what was going to be in the report. Dominic Raab must have some self-awareness. I mean, he was Deputy Prime Minister. But judging by his response, he lacks pretty much a lot of it, because even in this response, you can see that you can have some sort of sympathy for the victims and the way that his attitude to, you've been found guilty by a KC of bullying and some outrageous behaviour, and not an apology, just I think the process is wrong. I think he's gone into victim mode again. And I think, the challenge really really is about how the Prime Minister has not really been able to take effective action. He knew in advance, before he appointed Dominic Raab, that there was these bullying allegations against him. That's why the victims came forward, because he brought him back into Cabinet and they were frightened of what was going to be coming their way. And he's taken months with this investigation. He got the report. It's been heavily choreographed, Dominic Raab's response, to trash the report before it came out. And Rishi Sunak's response to Dominic Raab has been appalling and weak and lacks political judgment, in my opinion.
Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, many thanks indeed, as always. 19 minutes after 12. Lots of people sending me proof of one particular pudding that I just shared with Ms Rayner. Sorry you can't hack it. Dominic Raab resigns as Deputy PM with furious blast at snowflake civil servants. And they don't put the word snowflake in quotes because Dominic Raab didn't use it. So that's the Daily Mail's editorial fly. I tell you what, you want to know about bullying, try and sit on an editorial conference at the Daily Mail 10 years ago. Then you would have... I can't use the phrase that was coined to describe what a man called Paul Dacre, how he used to speak to his staff, but a double something was the phrase that became very well known in Fleet Street circles. So the idea that they think somehow the people complaining about being bullied are at fault here is not as remarkable as it may appear at first glance. So the Daily Mail already moving to back up Dominic Raab's narrative that the civil servants were all liars, and if they weren't liars, they were snowflakes, and if they weren't snowflakes, they were responsible for the way that they were treated. And anyway, I didn't rob 10 banks, I only robbed 2. It's 12:20. It is interesting, and it's stuff in the weeds, actually, that doesn't constitute evidence of bullying. In this case, the officials who gave evidence didn't say that it had upset them or affected them adversely, but it tells us a tale of what Dominic Raab is like. This is amazing. For example, his dissatisfaction that a particular, if relatively minor issue had not been resolved after an extended period of time led him to press repeatedly to identify the very junior official responsible and to the appearance of a more senior official to apologise to the Deputy Prime Minister. That is a man absolutely riddled with insecurity. So a junior member of staff makes what he considers to be a mistake. He won't let it lie. He insists again and again and again on finding out who is responsible, and then insists that their superior comes and apologises to him. That's pathetic. I'm just trying to imagine what the equivalent of that would be in LBC circles or on this show. What would it be? I would have to demand, if Keith, no, because Keith wouldn't make a mistake. Someone below Keith in the food chain makes a mistake. Who's below you in the food chain? No? Because this is probably bullying, isn't it? So something wrong with my sandwich. Actually, no one ever brings me a sandwich. Those days are behind me. I don't know what the equivalent would be, but someone very, very junior makes a mistake, and I demand that their manager comes and apologises to me in person. It's just not normal behaviour. Robert's in Royal Wootton Bassett. Robert, what would you like to say?
Sorry, James, I'm just laughing. My wife has literally just brought me a sandwich.
Oh, lucky you. Carry on.
I'd like to go a little bit further from what you said earlier on, James. Being a good day for democracy. I think it's a good day for the rule of law and accountability, and especially the separation of powers. This relates to his role as Lord Chancellor, being the Deputy PM. He's a little bit of background, the Lord Chancellor's role. Before the Constitutional Reform Act, the Lord Chancellor basically spanned all 3 institutions: the executive, the legislature, the judiciary. And
mate, your phone, you're going to have to do something about your phone line. I think I can hear your sandwich in the background. I don't know if I'm on speaker or something like. We'll come back to you in a second, I promise. Daniel's in Mansfield. Daniel, what would you like to say? Or
Hello?
Nothing. Hello, Daniel. Are you all right?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking about what sandwich to buy myself.
Have you ended up on the radio by accident?
No. I was talking to one of your lovely people, saying, "Are you ready, Daniel?"
Go on, then.
I thought, "Oh, hang on." And yeah, the whole Dominic Raab thing. He's only done this so that he can take the higher ground, rather than him being outed like Naheem Zahawi was, going, "You're fired." The Raab's gone, you know what? I'll resign. That makes me look like the better person, and I'm not a bully. I'm a lovely man. I'm sorry, but he's a colossal muppet.
Yeah, that'll do. I'm glad. I can see. I thank you for your diplomacy. I can see that you self-censored there in the course.
Quite heavily.
Well, a big difference between money and behaviour, isn't there? You can defend behaviour. You can, if you were so minded to, you could start blaming this on the victims. When it's cash money, when there's numbers on a sheet in front of you, as there were with Zahawi, it's a very different problem. It's probably a mistake of mine to actually compare them.
Sorry, the problem is as well, they say, we're doing everything we can to the cost of living crisis. I live in Mansfield. It's an old miners' town. It's an old pit town. It's on its backside. Yes. I think I can say that.
Yes, you can.
Good. And it's just ridiculous. They're not doing anything. They don't see the cost of living crisis because they get paid thousands of pounds a week just to sit on their bottoms going.
Well, you also have Mansfield's in Nottinghamshire, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so you've also got Nottinghamshire MPs marching around the place, supposedly representing constituencies like yours, claiming that there isn't a cost of living crisis. It's just because people can't budget. They could easily live on 30p a week, and how dare nurses complain about their wages? So it comes from both sides. Go on.
You say that. Given the local elections are coming up soon.
Careful. Well, you can't say anything there that might get me into trouble. Scratch that. Change it.
Okay, I'll scratch that. But it's just ridiculous. Raab's he's useless. The whole government's useless. It's just ridiculous.
There is a sense of running out of reel, actually, a sort of unravelling. I feel that myself. I do this for a living. And up until relatively recently, it's great for business. The more chaos there is. I thought, like a fool, for 10 minutes when Sunak got in, I thought, all good. We probably won't spend quite as much time detailing the absolute chaos in the heart of the Conservative government as we used to do, but it's not really going very well, that hope. And I would like to talk about other stuff. This is supposed to be Fluffy Friday. 12 o'clock on Fridays, we're supposed to be doing quite fun stuff. I was toying with the idea of going back to the coronation and saying, are you excited yet? I can't do that for much longer. I've probably only got, what have I got, a fortnight left of that, is it? Or a week? A fortnight? So that's probably gone by the by with today, but there it is, 27 minutes after 12 is the time. Let's go back to Robert. I haven't got as much time as I had, Robert, so I'll shut up and let you fill your boots. Go on.
Yeah, I was just thinking this is actually a good day for the Constitution. We had an already very weak separation of powers. When he was appointed Lord Chancellor, Secretary of Justice, alongside being the Deputy PM, he was essentially accountable to himself. He's been threatening to cherry-pick rules, etc., etc. But now that he's been removed from that role, we can arguably say that the separation of powers has been strengthened again because we haven't literally got someone that must defend the judiciary against himself, but whilst at the same time being duty-bound to defend the independence of the judiciary. It was a very odd situation to be in, but the way that he bullies, I think, is part of the environment, the political environment that the Tories have created since Johnson in order to get Brexit over the line. In the past, parliamentarians actually massively resisted any ideological revolution. It was only times of work in war.
I don't. We're going to run out of time. That's the only reason I'm interrupting. I don't want to rain on your parade, and I hope you're right. But I can't. I don't. Just because he's gone doesn't mean that everything rotten about him goes with him. As a sort of legal watcher, do you want to know my theory?
Yeah, of course.
I don't know. I haven't got any evidence for this except the first bit of it. But he did his articles with a city law firm, and he didn't get taken on, as far as I can tell. You would very rarely, when you finish doing your articles, you very rarely would walk away from a big city law firm, right? Everybody who does their articles is hoping that they're going to get taken on by the law firm.
Yeah,
I think he's been taking revenge on the entire legal profession ever since for his failure to get taken on by, I can't remember whether it was Freshfields or Linklaters, one of the big six. Just entirely theoretical. I was just looking at his Wikipedia page and thinking, that's odd. Every lawyer I know who got articles with a big six firm was set up for life. But if for some reason they didn't offer him terms after his training contract, it would explain. Because I think Suella Braverman is taking revenge on the entire legal profession for her own legal career as well. It's funny. There's like two little peas in a pod. Thank you, Robert. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines. 12:32 is the time. So I've got an example of what the equivalent would be at LBC of Dominic Raab demanding that a senior member of staff comes and apologises if a junior member of staff makes a mistake. No names, no pack drill. But if somebody, for example, had just misspelt the name Raab on what was poised to become one of my viral clips, I wouldn't take issue with him or her. I would instead insist that the head of viral clips must come down to the studio now and apologise to me for the fact that one of his or her members of staff spelt Raab wrong on a clip that was sent to me for approval before being posted onto. That's what Dominic Raab would do. What would Dom do? So I've got in front of me a clip that is ready, being prepared for release, and in that clip the word Raab is misspelt with 2 B's and only 1 A. And rather than taking issue with the person that wrote that, I would say, who did that? Who did that? Keith, who did that? Who wrote that? Who did that? This is what Dominic Raab does. Flipping heck, Keith, you threw him under the bus pretty quickly then. Who did that? I want the name. Who did it? Who was it? Who was the junior member of staff that misspelt Dominic Raab on? Right, bring me their boss now. I want their boss now in here apologising to me. Admit that's what he does. That's the example. Thank you. 12:33 is the time. A complete change of pace, topic and gear now, and one that you know is very close to my heart, because if you donated to our charity Make Some Noise last year, then you are about to help us do something very, very special. Today is the day that Global's Make Some Noise helps to change 24,000 lives through small charities in local communities just like yours and right across the UK. I'm going to play you some audio of a meeting I had last month with people from a charity I introduced you to last year called Parenting Mental Health. They're going to give you a little indication of just how tough things are for charities right now. And then I get the incredible privilege and pleasure of delivering some rather good news. With me again is Suzanne Alderson, the founder of Parenting Mental Health, a charity set up by Suzanne after her experience supporting her teenage daughter through depression, anxiety and suicide attempts. It's a charity born really of the shocking discovery of how little official support is currently in place and how desperate your scenario has to be before you can even get through the door of organisations like CAMS. The charity offers support, skills, understanding and crucially hope to parents who are not trained or ready for the role they have to take on, parents who feel unsure about how best to support their child's mental health as well as their own, parents who, I would add, quite often get it wrong against all of their better judgment and despite the purest of intentions, without any proper training, support or help, you can end up making things worse. I'm also joined by Alison, a mum who has been supported by the charity. Suzanne, let's start with you. Just give me an idea of how tough things are for you right now as a consequence of the cost of living crisis. I mean, it's a powerful and important charity at the best of times, but presumably people haven't got the money that they had 5-10 years ago.
No, absolutely, James. I think the cost of living crisis and also post-COVID, education has shifted post-COVID. So attendance now is at any cost. And what we're seeing is more and more young people are really struggling with anxiety, with neurodiversity, and trying to get into school is harder. Parents are struggling with, obviously, as you say, cost of living, and that has an impact on their mental health, their ability to be present, to be patient, and to help their children through this. So we're seeing huge numbers of families coming to us simply not able to cope day to day and also not able to get access to support through the traditional methods of going through your doctor, your GP and going to CAMS.
We've talked before about how, in many ways, we all wish that your charity didn't have to exist and that the official channels were fit for purpose, were up to the job. I sense it's getting worse, not better.
I think it's absolutely getting worse. And I think what's happening is, as the thresholds for care increase, the pressure on parents is just becoming untenable. And so if you've got a child who you take to A&E, who may have taken an overdose, and you're sent home because actually there's nothing that can be done for them, then what does that say about our society? What does that say to that parent, and what does that say to that child?
Well, do you have a typical reaction? Can you think, this might be a really silly question,
But the other two were all right, so I'll let myself ask this one. Do you have a typical reaction in parents when they realise that you are actually able to help them? I sort of have a sense of enormous sagging of shoulders, a sort of great, finally somebody knows what it's like.
There's a desperate sense of relief and release, I think, as well, because you hold this together for so long, because your friends and family don't get it. You might be struggling to work, you might be struggling to get your child into school, you might be struggling to get them access to care, all the while blaming yourself for the reasons why you're here and the reasons you can't get out of it. So to come to somewhere that's judgment-free, really compassionate, and we've been there. I've been through it, as you said. I've been there. So many of our volunteers have lived this and come out the other side. So actually what parents tend to feel is an enormous sense of relief. And then there's a sense of, my goodness, the scale of this problem is so enormous, and how am I going to get through it? And fortunately, the charity can support them with skills and training and listening circles and a whole range of ways that they can connect, including in our peer support community.
What about your fundraising? How has that been affected by other events?
I think we've been fortunate in many ways that organisations like Globals Make Some Noise has funded us, because having that 12 months worth of funding so that we can secure our volunteer managers, so we can then take our volunteers on a journey, we can skill them up, we can take them to a place where they feel more confident, they can actually go out into the workplace if they want to, but they can also give back to a charity that's given them so much. That sounded incredibly arrogant, and I didn't mean it to, but it does actually.
Of course it didn't.
It does give them such a lot. Is just so meaningful, and I think what's clear to us is that as funding becomes harder to get, having partnerships like this just means so much, and not just the money. Actually, the sense that I'm sitting here with you now, and we're talking about the impact of having a child with a mental health issue. This is hidden. It's hidden away from it's hiding in plain sight.
It is, and it'll be resonating with many parents listening now who haven't managed to find help or even acknowledge that they're part of a much bigger problem. Alison, there's a thank you for coming along. I hope you enjoyed the train ride.
Loved it, thank you.
I've always been struck by the phrase, as a parent, you can only be as happy as your unhappiest child. And it's that sort of combination, the sense of a mental health issue affecting a child actually affecting the whole family. That's where parenting mental health really come to families' aid.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's altogether true, because if that was the case, so many parents would be on the floor.
Yes.
And you can't be when your child's struggling. So that's the beauty of parenting mental health, because even if you've got the most supportive friends and family, they don't necessarily always understand or get it or know what to say. Whereas you can come into parenting mental health and you're heard and seen and supported. And so many people comment, along the lines of, I was scared to reach out, but I'm so glad I did. And so many people can relate. So it's just having that safe space. It's absolutely invaluable on this journey, and it helps to keep your mental health going, because it is a really, really difficult journey.
How did you find out about the charity?
For me, I had my daughter had been incredibly unwell. I tried a couple of other groups, and I was about to give up hope, really, of finding somewhere where I felt it wasn't a judgmental space. Yeah. There's a lot out there that can be quite harsh.
Why haven't you done this?
And you don't need that.
No, of course.
And I literally, someone made a comment on another page, and I thought, I'll just try it. And that was about 2.5 years ago, and I've never looked back. And it's a very, very unique space in the field of social media.
Can you give us an idea of why? What can you remember the first time you realised, oh my gosh, I've finally found someone.
I think we'd been through quite a lot, and I didn't know anybody at all who had been through us, even similar to us. And I saw somebody else post and thought, oh my God, there is someone else out there who has been through something similar. But the more I got to know PMH and Suzanne, it's very much, however long it's been running, her ethos is at the heart, and everyone that's involved follows that. So it is about the no judgment and compassion and empathy and understanding and support. signposting, because you don't always have the capacity to Google.
Of course.
So you've got a good team that will help with that.
It's like the roads have already been travelled down, haven't they? So they can guide you down.
When you're on this journey, you don't ever think that it's so horrific, some of it, and you don't ever think that good will come from it. But there's so much wisdom in the learning, and it would be a waste not to do anything with that. So, in PMH, to be able to offer comfort or hope or a resource to someone else literally can make a difference to their life or their day, which sounds dramatic, but it's not, because it can be hard to find those things.
It's so lonely, though, isn't it?
Incredibly. It can be completely life-changing,
yes.
Very isolating. Your world just shrinks.
We set out to raise £29,720 to fund Parenting Mental Health's volunteer training programme for 1 year, Suzanne. Just talk us quickly through what that will mean or would mean to your charity.
Well, for us, our volunteers are at the heart of everything we do. We're a volunteer-led charity. And what we see is because this takes so much, it strips families of so much. And for parents, they learn different skills through going through this. They learn huge skills around advocacy. They learn great resilience. They learn enormous strength. But those things you don't generally you can't put them on a CV. So what we want to do with our volunteer manager role is to really take these parents on a journey and develop out their skills, develop their confidence, and enable them to give back and receive what they've received through parenting mental health. But also because they might have had to leave their jobs, they might not be able to go out to work because of the impact of their child's mental health.
Yeah.
We hope that this might actually help them in the future to go on and go into paid employment. So it will have a huge impact, not only on our community because they'll be more supported, but also on individuals who volunteer for us who, can get something for their contribution.
We are on the radio, so I don't know what the impact's going to be of the enormous cheque that I now get to give you. This is one of the best bits of my job, obviously. So what I'm just going to hold it up and I'm going to ask you to read out what is written on it. If you could do, please.
Oh.
Sorry, it's radio. Parenting mental health, £75,000. Oh, thank you so much.
So that is more than double what you were expecting. And
that's phenomenal.
Consequence of the times being tough and the generosity of our listeners. So you will now be able to fund that lived experience volunteer skills and empowerment project for 2 more years.
Wow.
Which allows you to organise, train and empower volunteers to help scale support, reaching more parents and reducing their isolation. Costs also include, as you said, a volunteer and community development manager, plus roll-on costs. Also included in this figure is an unrestricted £5,000 to contribute to the charity's increased outgoings caused by the cost of living crisis. Well, I think if people can't understand the squeaks and gasps.
I'm actually dismantling the studio at the moment.
What does that mean to you, Suzanne?
Oh, it's gosh, as you can possibly tell from my silence, it's my squeaks. It means everything. It's so hard to raise money and to be able to look at the impact beyond 12 months, I will not wake up maybe tomorrow morning thinking about fundraising like I always do. So thank you so much.
Takes a bit of pressure off you.
Oh, massive pressure off of me. But also we can start to really, put this at the heart of what we do rather than thinking this is a project. This becomes part of who we are. So thank you, Globals Make Some Noise. Amazing.
Thank you.
Blown away.
Suzanne, Alison, thank you both.
Thank you.
12:46. I wish you could have seen the footage as well. It was, I think you will be able to. You could hear what that means. These vital small charities are there for people like those in your community, your neighbourhood, even your family. You'd like to think that if it was you that needed help, then they would be there for you. Make Some Noise is doubling the amount of money charities will receive, which is vital as times are extremely tough. But they still need our help right now, so let's help keep these doors open. If you are able to, and it's obviously tougher than it's ever been, then we would love you to donate whatever you can to make some noise. Just a few quid from everyone listening right now would make the kind of difference you just heard that we've made, or you've made rather, to parenting mental health. To donate £30, £20 or £10, then text LBC 30, LBC 20 or LBC 10, no spaces, so letters and numbers, LBC 30, LBC 20 or LBC 10, LBC 30, 20 or 10 to 70766. That's 70766. 100% of your donation will go to Global's Make Some Noise. You have to be 16 or over to join in. Do seek the bill payer's permission before picking up the phone. Standard network charges may apply, and the full terms and conditions are at makesomenoise.com. Just £20 could pay for a parent whose child is currently experiencing mental health issues to attend a peer support session led by a trained facilitator with lived experience. And there they will be heard and they will be validated by other people who get what they're going through. £30 could pay for a parent in the same position to have a session with a professional counsellor. That's priceless. It might be £30, but it is also priceless. That's the number you need to text LBC 30, LBC 20 or LBC 10 is 70766. It is 12:51. It's time for me to push you towards not just this week's full disclosure, actually, but also the guest on a recent episode who's going to talk to us about these emergency mobile phone thingamies that are going to kick off on Sunday afternoon. Daily Mail tried to turn that into a huge scaremongering story, but it obviously petered out because they've given up on it now. They've attacked the unelected House of Lords instead. But this week's guest, so that's Lucy Easthope, who we'll speak to shortly. First, Jason Arday, right? This, I think, is arguably the most extraordinary interview I've ever conducted. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. Most obviously is I went into it a bit lazily, perhaps, expecting it to be a fairly colour-by-numbers tale of overcoming adversity. So Jason couldn't speak until he was about 12. He couldn't read or write until he was about 18. And at the age of 37, he became the youngest ever black professor at the University of Cambridge. So you can understand why I thought it was going to be one of those inspirational, tear-filled... It was nothing like that at all. It was among the most incredible human encounters I have ever had in my life. And I came out of there thinking differently about lots and lots of things. I nearly said everything, but that would be hyperbole. I came out of the room thinking differently about so many things. And so many things I thought I had quite a good grasp of. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm simply going to tell you that if you only listen to 2 podcasts this year, make sure it's Jason Arday, who you're about to hear from, and Lucy Easthope, who you will hear from shortly. And remember, you can get Full Disclosure from wherever you get your podcast, but I would recommend Global Player, because there you get all your LBC gubbins as well, all your Rewind Radio, and your opportunity to check out whole show podcasts. So here is a little taste of this week's Full Disclosure. Can we begin with your autism? Because I've read 2 accounts. It's diagnosed with autism and global development delay, or that global development delay is a consequence of autism. Are they linked or separate?
No, they're separate.
Right.
2 separate things. So obviously it's not called Asperger's anymore, but it's called ASD, so autistic spectrum disorder. But I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, old money, Asperger's in 88, and then a few months separated from that, and I was diagnosed with a global development delay. Okay, and it's the global development delay that explained the inability to speak. Yeah, the inability to speak, and then the consequential delay in terms of learning to read and write. But which is always an interesting thing, because I've obviously been fortunate to occupy a few kind of media spaces in the last couple of weeks, and I think there's this presumption that I must have been significantly disadvantaged, but I keep kind of emphasising to people it was beautiful. It was there's a stillness in the paralysis of speech, which is you're able to observe the world and human interaction in very unique and different ways, and so for me it was brilliant, and it's something that really kept me just observing human interaction itself is quite a remarkable thing, and cues and stuff. And it's amazing how, as human beings, we don't actually have time to do that. A lot of our interactions with people are transactional. Yes. But observation. Just purely based on observation, and like I said, that paralysis of speech, you kind of you're in this kind of state where you're almost in this cocoon, and you're learning how to engage with people in different ways, even though you can't verbalize. And then I guess it comes to the fore when you become an 11-year-old, and while you're still kind of learning the dexterity and the lexicon of speech, you get to 18, 20, and especially when I was at 20 and I first went to university. And you learn to engage with people, and you realise all of those kind of salient lessons, those salient observations as a young child, it comes to the fore when you're meeting people you don't know.
Yes.
And you have to be able to cultivate relationships with people very quickly and glean trust and all of those types of things. And, it was hugely advantageous.
Jason Arday there, appearing on this week's Full Disclosure. I think 3 weeks ago it was Lucy Easthope, the emergency planner and author of the remarkable book When the Dust Settles, and she joins me now because I thought, who can we get to tell us about these alarms that are going off on Sunday? And I suddenly thought, who better than Lucy Easthope? Why have we never had it before? Hello, by the way, Lucy, how are you?
Hello, James. I'm very good, thank you. Well, we've been working on it for a while. So our first regionalised test was 2013.
Okay.
But this is the big one. So, for us, as emergency planners in the UK, this has been a bit of a long time coming. But I can see why the people are quite concerned about the timing after everything they've been through.
And why is it so important? I know that's a silly question, but indulge me.
It's one of the tools in a toolkit. It's not going to solve everything. But if you're an emergency planner in the UK, you've been kind of staring in at other countries who've had this technology for a while. At least 20 other countries use exactly this system. And it's it's just absolutely standard in places like New Zealand, Australia, across Europe. So we see our fellow responders in other countries being able to get people to go to safety or stay indoors. And we just don't have that technology. So overall, we're quite pleased to see the test on Sunday.
And what exactly will happen at 3:00 on Sunday afternoon?
So between 3, it won't necessarily be immediate on everybody's phones. It's sort of around 3:00. A large siren noise will go across your phone. This is not like a text message. It will only work on 4G and 5G phone networks, and you don't have to be connected to mobile data or Wi-Fi to get the alerts at that time.
Blimey.
I think sort of sociologically it'll be quite fascinating. Football matches. It's the London Marathon. Lots of people will be receiving it. You won't receive it if it's completely turned off or you're in airplane mode.
Okay.
And one of the things you will have seen that we're campaigning very vigorously on, and I mean people like me, we haven't had a huge amount of support ministerially for this, is that if you have
they've got a lot on, Lucy. I don't know if you're aware of that.
They certainly seem to. But if you've got a safe or hidden phone, please do follow the refuge guidance. And that's not just to turn it off on Sunday. Our advice would always be to go into your settings, go down to emergency alerts and turn it off for all reception of emergency alerts, because it's a test on Sunday, but we could use it from that point forward. So if you do have a hidden phone at home for safety reasons, please do that.
Very solid advice. So don't just turn it off or put it on airplane mode on Sunday afternoon, but turn it off permanently in the settings. There's no downside to it, really. Are you worried about people being taken by surprise while driving and things? The Daily Mail had a crack at trying to turn it into a negative, but even they didn't have the skills to pull that off.
Well, I mean, there are some negatives. I mean, I can completely see why people feel like, yet again, after everything they've been through, there's a kind of another reason to feel alarmed. It also won't be without its own problems. So just 2 nights ago, the tech system that Florida uses alerted people in the middle of the night, just as a test, and the governor's furious about that. So that contract has been terminated. We've seen Hawaii's technology used in an exercise, but it forgot to say that it was an exercise, so people thought it was a real nuclear alert. It's not like any emergency comms. No. It's not without its problems.
Which is all the more reason to test it, really, isn't it?
Oh, that's what we want to do as emergency planners, definitely.
Splendid. Finally, Lucy Easthope, did appearing on Full Disclosure change your life?
Most definitely. Thank you very much for having me.
No, you're very welcome. You can download that episode from Global Player, as well as the latest episode with Jason Arday, and you should check out Lucy's book, When the Dust Settles, as well. That's it from me for another week. We'll do it again Monday morning from 10. Sheila Fogarty. Tom Sawbrook with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now.
You got it in the end, didn't you?
In the end.
Came in your time in the end.
Yeah, I know it did.
Yeah,
Well, quite right too. I deserved it. Still blocked me on Twitter.
Never mind.
I had to get Keith to print out the resignation letter. I couldn't read it on my phone.
You're not missing much, don't worry.
No, I know.
Missing much. much, don't worry. Missing 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 much, don't worry. Missing